What if you were the one holding destiny's scalpel, yet every slice could seal your doom? As the clouds of plague thicken, and the air chokes with despair, would you dare wear the tattered robes of a medieval physician, or would you flee like a coward before the grim reaper's parade? More than a mere disease, the plague is a twisted game where compassion is a luxury, and survival a gamble with razor-edged stakes. Picture this: blood-slicked streets where the dead outnumber the living, and the cries of the afflicted echo like a haunting symphony. You, a doctor with dubious skills and a quack's toolkit, stand at the crossroads of life and death. The townsfolk, eyes wide with terror, whisper your name with reverence and fear, for you are their last hope and their worst nightmare. The stench of mortality lingers, mingling with the sickly sweet aroma of poppy and herbs, and you must navigate this macabre tapestry of humanity or risk becoming a part of it. In a world where the line between healer and harbinger blurs, each decision could unleash chaos or stave off extinction. Patients stagger through your door, faces twisted in agony, desperate for salvation. But what do you offer? A potion brewed from the entrails of ancient secrets? A bleeding that may very well bleed them dry? The grim irony clings to you, wraps around your heart like a noose. Well-meaning intentions are often the sharpest daggers. And then there's the shadow of the church, looming like a vulture above your head, eager to condemn or elevate, depending on how well you play their twisted game. One misstep, one wrong incantation, and the pyres will blaze anew. Have you got the guts to face the inquisitors? Can you withstand the weight of their judgment with the lives of the desperate balanced on your shoulders? But the plague is not merely a disease, it's an insidious entity that knows your weaknesses, that waits for you to falter in your arrogance. It revels in your failures, cackling as it dances through the streets, claiming friend and foe alike. You might find humor in the absurdity, a jest at the expense of the dying, a laugh shared over a comical misdiagnosis, but the laughter rings hollow when the specter of death looms. As the clock ticks down, you realize the grisly truth: no one survives the plague unscathed. Will you become the hero everyone needs, or will you succumb to the madness that festers in the hearts of the desperate? Will you emerge with your sanity intact, or will the whispers of the damned haunt you, gnawing at the very fabric of your soul? Time is running out. The plague waits for no one. It's a matter of life and death, a seductive dance with turmoil. What will you choose when the stakes skyrocket and the world crumbles around you? The answer is written in the blood of your patients, and it's waiting for you. The air was thick with impending doom, a silent scream echoing through cobblestone streets lined with shuttered windows and ghostly shadows. A child's laughter, high and bright, suddenly stilled as if the world itself held its breath. Lying in the dirt, a forgotten toy, a wooden horse, its paint chipped and eyes dulled, seemed to mourn the innocence lost, the joy that once danced through these alleys now strangled by an unseen hand. I remember the day the bells tolled for the first time. Each clang resonated deep within my bones, a metallic reminder that death was no longer a distant spectre but a tangible presence lurking in every corner. Richard, a desperate father with sunken eyes, clutched his son's tiny hand, the warmth slipping away like grains of sand through his fingers. His heart raced with unspoken words, a flurry of pleas and not yet swelling in his throat. And then there was Mary, a seamstress with nimble fingers that wove love into every stitch, her heart weighed heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. In her small home, where sunlight filtered through grimy windows, each thread became a lifeline, a prayer woven into fabric, though the shadows outside loomed larger by the hour. Time itself felt like it was unspooling, stretching and warping, taunting us with every tick of the clock. I remember how the sun would rise, casting a golden glow on a city teetering on the brink of madness. The scent of bread baking, crusty loaves and sweet pastries filled the air, a cruel reminder of normalcy, as if the world outside was unaware of the creeping darkness. But whispers of the plague slithered through the streets, carried on the wind like a taunting melody. "It's just a fever," they'd say, but fear twisted their voices into a chorus of denial, a fragile facade crumbling as the sick dropped like autumn leaves. Richard's eyes glazed over, haunted by the spectre of his beloved wife, whose laughter now echoed only in memories. "I can't lose him too," he whispered, clutching the boy tighter, as if raw desperation could stave off fate. The child's weary eyes met his, bore the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. "Daddy, what's wrong?" His innocence cut Richard deeper than any blade. And then there was Mary, threading needle and cloth with shaking hands, each motion a prayer, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she could sew the threads of fate back together. The fabric she worked with was pale and threadbare, a reflection of her own spirit, frayed and vulnerable. If I just keep working, she thought, if I just keep making something beautiful, I might create a shield against the darkness. But her heart ached, heavy with the knowledge that beauty was not a weapon against death. The streets grew silent, the laughter of children replaced by the wails of mourning. I remember the first corpse I saw, a body sprawled in the gutter, skin ashen, mouth agape in a final, silent scream. For a moment, time froze, and I felt the cold grip of despair wrapping around my heart. The stench of decay mixed with the city's filth, a grotesque perfume that clung to every corner, every breath. The ghosts of the past walked among us, their eyes hollow, their cries unheard. Richard found himself standing beside that body, his heart thudding wildly in his chest. It was a woman he once knew, her laughter, now a distant memory, echoed in his mind. She had sold flowers at the market, a burst of color in a world gone grey. "What is happening?" he whispered, to the shadows, to the ghosts, to no one. "Why is this happening?" Mary, too, had her own demons to face. The faces of the lost danced in her dreams, haunting her every thought. "Will I be next?" she pondered, feeling the insatiable monster lurking at the edge of her mind. The fabric in her hands felt like lead, heavy with the weight of each stitch, every thread a reminder of the lives that once were, the laughter that now seemed like a cruel joke played by fate. "Keep your head down," they said, "don't draw attention." The advice was a feeble armor against the onslaught of despair. But the city was a living thing, pulsing and breathing, and soon its heart began to quicken, a chaotic symphony of fear, desperation, and the raw instinct for survival. I remember the night we lit candles, their flickering flames casting hesitant shadows on the walls, a fragile defiance against the encroaching darkness. Mary stood at her window, watching the glow of each small flame, wondering if they could light the way back to hope. Richard knelt beside his son, a makeshift bed of blankets and dirty straw, whispering stories of brave knights and distant lands, trying to shield the boy from the bitter truth that clawed relentlessly at their door. But whispers of the plague grew louder, swelling into a cacophony that drowned out hope. The streets became a graveyard, each corner turned revealing another name on a list of the lost. Friends became strangers, neighbors turned into ghosts, each face a reminder that survival was a gamble with fate. And then came the moment when Richard found himself staring into the dark abyss of his son's eyes, the embers of life flickering like the dying flame of a candle. "Please, don't take him," he begged the shadows, a primal cry echoing in the silence that enveloped them. The weight of silence pressed down, heavy and suffocating, an unyielding reminder that they were all merely threads in the tapestry of existence, easily frayed and forgotten. Time twisted, and reality slipped through their fingers like water. In that moment, a realization washed over Mary. There was beauty in the struggle, a fragile light that flickered despite the overwhelming darkness. She would fight for every last stitch, for every breath, for every heartbeat that still pulsed with life. Life and death intertwined, a dance as old as time itself, and in that haunting waltz, Richard, Mary, and the child stood on the precipice, hearts racing, breaths shallow, staring into the abyss together. Each heartbeat echoed the unyielding truth: the plague was an inevitable tide, a relentless force that could not be ignored. But in their fragile hands, they held something far more powerful: hope, raw and fierce, an ember that could ignite a fire even in the darkest of nights. And so, as the shadows crept closer, they prepared to confront the storm, knowing that the true battle lay not in the fight against death but in the fierce determination to live, even in a world overrun by despair. Time would continue its relentless march, and they would stand firm, refusing to be swallowed by the darkness. Each moment became a heartbeat, a reminder that they were still alive, still fighting, even as the plague whispered its chilling promises of loss and grief. The story was far from over. The city, the plague, the lives caught in its fatal embrace, it all hung in the balance, a delicate thread waiting to be unraveled or stitched anew. The midnight chime of the clock echoed through the empty streets, a haunting reminder that time does not care for the living. I remember that moment vividly, a cold gust swirling around me, whispering secrets of despair and decay. The shadows danced along the cobblestones, as if the very ghosts of the past were warning of what was to come. The air was thick, heavy with an unspoken dread, and I felt a chill creep down my spine, a premonition that the world was teetering on the edge of a precipice. There, in the heart of the city, stood Eliza, her eyes wide with terror, scanning the horizon. The plague had slithered through the streets like a serpent, its venomous grip tightening around her heart. She had lost her mother just days prior, the illness sweeping through their humble abode like a storm, leaving nothing but despair in its wake. "I can't let it take me too," she whispered, her voice trembling, as if the very mention of death would summon it like a spectre from the shadows. I remember the way her fingers twitched, clawing at the air as if trying to grasp hope, a fragile thread in a world unraveling. And then there was Thomas, the apothecary, a man whose hands had once brought life but now only served to measure out death. He stood in his dimly lit shop, surrounded by jars filled with herbs that had lost their magic. His heart pounded with the weight of knowledge, a burden he could not shake. "I've created potions to ward off sickness, but what do I do now?" he raged into the silence, his fists clenched, veins pulsing with despair. The townsfolk once came to him seeking cures, but now they fled, terrified of the very air they breathed. He was a ghost in his own life, a man left behind as the tide of disease rolled over the land. "It's as if hope itself has become a plague," he muttered, eyes darting to the door as if expecting death to barge in uninvited. The sun had long since set, leaving only the chilling embrace of night, an all-consuming darkness that mirrored the void in their hearts. The streets were eerily quiet, but within that silence lay a cacophony of fears, the fear of contagion, of isolation, of the unknown. I remember the stories that swept through the alleyways like wildfire, each tale more grotesque than the last, painting vivid pictures of bloated bodies and fevered prayers. "It's the devil's work," they said, their voices quaking with fear. "A punishment for our sins." What sins? Who was left to judge in a world where death had become the only certainty? Eliza and Thomas, they were intertwined in this nightmare, bound by a thread of grief and desperation. She would come to him, desperate for a remedy, a glimmer of hope. "Please, Thomas, tell me there's something," she pleaded, her hands trembling as she clutched her mother's shawl. But he could only offer her the bitter truth, his heart breaking with each feeble attempt to comfort her. "The herbs will only do so much, Eliza. It's not a cure I can give, it's a distraction," he admitted, the words tasting like ash on his tongue. I remember the time when laughter filled the air. The market was bustling with life, merchants hawked their wares, children darted between the stalls, laughter ringing like bells. Now, that life felt like a distant memory, a cruel joke in the face of reality. The plague was a thief, robbing them of joy, leaving behind only echoes of what once was. No greetings exchanged in the streets, no warmth of companionship, it was all replaced by hushed whispers of fear and rejection. As the days blurred into weeks, the shadows lengthened, creeping into every corner of their lives. Eliza's face grew pale, the vibrant spirit dimming with each passing hour spent in dread. "I remember the sun shining on my mother's face," she said one evening, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Now, it feels like a dream, a lie." It was a heartbreaking confession, a surrender to the darkness that surrounded them. Her voice cracked, a fragile thread stretching taut, and in that moment, I felt her pain like a dagger through my own heart. Thomas became a reflection of her despair, each dose of agony etched into his face, each sigh a reminder of his powerlessness. "What can I offer them when death wears the mask of a friend?" he lamented, staring into the abyss. His once bright eyes were now clouded with hopelessness, burdened by the weight of his failure to save those who had trusted him. "I remember when I believed in magic," he said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Now, I'm just a man with a shop filled with broken dreams." The city became a graveyard, each corner marked by loss, each building a monument to despair. The cries of the bereaved echoed through the night, a chilling symphony that wrapped itself around the hearts of those still clinging to life. It was a haunting melody, one that whispered of love lost, of dreams shattered, of a humanity on the brink of collapse. "I can't breathe," Eliza gasped one night, her chest tight with the weight of grief. "It's suffocating." But even in that suffocation, there was a glimmer, a faint flicker of rebellion. "We fight," Thomas said, and in his voice, there was a spark. We remember what it was to live. We carry their spirits in our hearts. He spoke the words with a fierce intensity, a desperate plea for survival in a world gone mad. Each heartbeat, each breath became an act of defiance against the creeping shadows, an affirmation that they would not go quietly into the night. Yet, as Eliza's health waned, the shadows grew longer, and I couldn't help but feel the impending doom close in, a predator stalking its prey. A confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon, a tempest of emotions building, ready to unleash a torrent of despair and hope. And in that moment, I realized, the story of plagues is not just about the disease that ravages the body, it's about the human spirit, the fight against the darkness, the resilience to rise even when the world around us crumbles. In the end, as the clock struck midnight again, and the silence washed over the city once more, I felt a stirring deep within me, a reminder that this was not just the end, but a beginning, an echo that would resonate through time. And as the shadows loomed, I knew the fight was far from over. In the heart of a city swollen with dread, the air hangs heavy, thick, like a blanket smothering the cries of the dying. Shadows stretch and curl along cobblestone streets, whispering secrets of lost lives. I can still hear the echoes, the frantic footfalls of a father racing through the chaos, the desperate wails of a mother cradling her child, the sickening stench of decay creeping into every crevice. It was the spring of 1348, and death was not just a visitor, it had become the very fabric of existence. I remember Agnes, her laughter once a bright melody weaving through the marketplace, now silenced by the pallor of fear. She was young, barely 18, just starting to understand the world around her, yet so much had already been stripped away. The last time I saw her, she stood alone in an alley, her back against the damp wall, staring blankly at the ground. Her auburn hair, usually a vibrant cascade, hung lifeless, like a wilted flower. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of despair. I had no answers, just a gnawing emptiness that mirrored her own. And then there was Thomas, a merchant with dreams bigger than his pockets. He had once boasted of wealth and prosperity, but greed had turned to fear, and fear had morphed into something darker. As the Black Death swept through, claiming friends and foes alike, I watched as he clawed at his sanity, counting the bodies left in the street, watching the cart roll by, the driver wearing a mask made of leather and glass, eyes hollow as the graves they dug. "I can save only myself," he muttered under his breath, panic fueling his every decision, reckless abandon taking root. In his eyes, I saw a haunted reflection of my own, desperate and hollow. I remember the sounds. The distant tolling of the church bell, its melancholy chime a reminder that time had not stopped, even as the world crumbled. Each clang resonated like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding, a rhythm underscoring the chaos that engulfed us. The plague was here, a ghostly spectre stalking through the streets, dragging its twisted fingers over the living and the dead alike. The air crackled with a visceral fear, a primal instinct that told us to run, yet the walls of our homes felt like a prison we couldn't escape. As the days dragged on, the city descended into madness. The marketplaces, once bustling with life, were now graveyards, their stalls abandoned, left to the crows. I could taste the fear, thick like ashes on my tongue, and I could feel the shadows creeping closer. I remember the whispers of the townsfolk, each word laced with suspicion and superstition. "It's the Jews," they said. "They've poisoned our wells." I watched as innocent lives were snuffed out, not by the Black Death, but by the fever of hysteria infecting the minds of those who remained. I felt rage curling in my belly, a knot of helplessness knitting me together, but I was powerless to intervene. The night stretched endlessly, each hour dragging like a weight, and sleep became a distant memory, a luxury I could no longer afford. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant cries of the forsaken. I often thought of Agnes, wondering if she too lay awake, haunted by visions of what should have been. In those dark hours, I dreamt of distant lands and untraveled roads, fantasies that felt like feeble attempts to escape the reality lurking just outside my door. But hope, I learned, is a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by despair. I remember the day it found me again, when Thomas, gaunt and wide-eyed, stumbled into my home, gasping for breath. "It's coming for us," he rasped, his voice a mere whisper, as if saying the words aloud would summon the spectre that haunted our streets. I could see it in his eyes, the same terror that gripped me, the same realization that we were all but moths fluttering toward a flame, drawn in by the inevitability of our fates. We sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words settling heavily between us. Time slipped like sand through our fingers, and I felt the hours bleed together. The world outside had become a grotesque theater, with life and death performing a harrowing dance, the audience mere shadows of what had once been. I wanted to scream, to break the suffocating silence, but the sound would have been swallowed whole by the void surrounding us. Days turned to weeks, and the toll of the plague became a relentless drumbeat in our lives, each victim a note in a tragic symphony. I remember the moment when the walls of our sanctuary began to crumble, when fear turned us against one another. The townsfolk gathered, torches in hand, eyes wild with fury, seeking a scapegoat for their suffering. I stood, trembling, as they chanted for justice, their voices rising in a cacophony that sent chills down my spine. It was in that moment I became both spectator and participant, the witness to the madness unfolding before me. Amidst the chaos, the bodies piled higher, an unholy monument to our collective failure. I could no longer tell where the city ended and the graveyard began. The air reeked of mortality, and each breath felt like a betrayal, a reminder of the life that clung so desperately to me while the world around me crumbled to dust. I remember standing at the edge of that abyss, staring into the void, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a strange sense of calm. We were all in this together, bound by the threads of suffering, stitched together by the fragility of our existence. But the calm shattered with the light of dawn, as the sun broke through the shadows, illuminating the horror that had taken root. I remember Agnes, her vacant eyes searching for solace in a world that had turned its back on her. I reached for her, but the distance felt insurmountable. In that split second, I understood, there was no escape from the nightmare. The Black Death was not just an enemy, it was a mirror reflecting our darkest fears, our deepest flaws, and the fragility of life itself. And so, we remained there, suspended in time, a web of fear and fury, desperation and despair, the clock ticking down toward an uncertain fate. I could feel the pulse of history thrumming beneath my feet, a reminder that humanity has always danced on the edge of oblivion, teetering dangerously close to the abyss. With each heartbeat, I realized that this was not merely a tale of plague and pestilence but a haunting reflection of the human condition, a relentless struggle between hope and despair, life and death. And in that tight embrace, we found ourselves, lost and found, forever entwined in the fabric of history. The chill of dawn hung in the air like a warning, an unspoken dread that clung to the skin. Tread softly, for the earth beneath you is not just soil, it's the grave of yesterday, a living echo of so many souls. I remember the day I first caught the scent of death, the heavy, sickly sweetness that crawled into my nostrils and settled there like a parasite. It was the spring of 1347, and the world was blissfully ignorant, going about its business while the shadow of the Black Death lurked just beyond the horizon. Wretchedly mundane lives filled with the humdrum of market stalls, the laughter of children, and the clanging of church bells. But there, beneath the bustle of life, something sinister brewed. In the back alleys of Messina, merchants stumbled off ships, their faces pale as freshly turned earth. They were the harbingers, the unwitting messengers of a horror that would soon sweep across the continent like a tempest. I remember watching from a distance, a boy named Luca with dreams bigger than his frail frame could hold. He too felt the air crackle with unease, his heart pounding like the hooves of galloping horses. He had lost his mother to the fever just months before, and now, the spectre of death loomed over him, and the world felt impossibly heavy. Then there was Agnes, a midwife, who cradled life and death in her hands every day. Each birth she attended was a dance with fate, but this plague twisted the rhythm into a macabre waltz. Her calloused hands had delivered countless babies, yet now they trembled, for she witnessed life slipping away just as easily. I remember her eyes, wide and dark, filled with dread that mirrored my own. "I can't save them all, Luca," she whispered, as if the admission could somehow ease the burden, the guilt coiling tightly around her heart. And dawn broke, revealing a city unaware of the storm it was about to face. The sun peered through cracks in the clouds, casting fractured light on cobblestones slick with the refuse of daily life. The markets bustled, but a thin veil of tension lay over everything. I watched as the merchants bartered, their voices rising and falling like the tide, unaware that the very air they breathed teemed with pestilence. The ships had arrived from the east, carrying more than just silks and spices. They brought the bite of rats, infested with fleas, each one a tiny assassin eager to draw blood. The plague danced on the backs of shadows, a silent spectre slipping through the cracks of cobblestone streets. The first signs were subtle, a cough here, a fever there. Luca watched as neighbors turned into strangers, eyes glazed with pain. I remember the whispers that followed like shadows. Is it a curse? Is it God's wrath? Days turned into weeks, and the pulse of the city quickened, a frantic heartbeat against the backdrop of despair. The taverns were alive with laughter, but the laughter was hollow, a mask for the fear gnashing at the door. What was once a refuge became a pit of anxiety. We bathed once a year, Luca joked, so romance was earthy. It was a desperate attempt at humor, a way to keep the echoes of death at bay for just a moment longer. But death would not be denied. It surged forth like a tidal wave, a relentless force that consumed everything in its path. I remember the first body I saw, sprawled in the dirt outside the church, a mere husk of the vibrant life it once held. The townsfolk, now a chorus of mourners, stood paralyzed, their tears mingling with the rain. Agnes was among them, her heart shattered as she knelt beside the lifeless form. "Forgive me," she implored, but the silence that followed was deafening, a haunting reminder that not all could be saved. Agnes felt the weight of each soul she could not save, and it twisted inside her like a knife. "I see them in my dreams," she confessed one night to Luca, her voice breaking. "They scream for me. They need me." Luca, with his youthful naivete, tried to comfort her, but how do you explain to a woman who cradled death's kiss that some burdens were too heavy to bear? The streets became a graveyard, and the scent of decay wrapped around us, thick and cloying. "They say the stars have aligned," Luca whispered, peering into the night sky, "that it's a sign of the end." His voice was a tremor, filled with a terror that clawed at the back of my throat. Agnes shook her head. "No, it's just the beginning." I remember the whispers, the frantic prayers escaping lips trembling with fear. The church bells tolled, but they no longer sang, they mourned, a chilling lament for lives lost to an unseen enemy. The once bustling square became a theater of despair where fear and hope twined like twisted vines, choking the air. Days bled into nights, and the seasons turned. Life was a relentless cycle that seemed to mock the dead. I remember the sun shining brightly on those who breathed, while shadows loomed over those who did not. Luca and Agnes drifted through this nightmare, haunted by their choices, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that the plague was not just a disease, it was a thief, stealing joy and innocence in its wake. And yet, even amid the horror, a glimmer of defiance sparked in their eyes. "We will not be forgotten," Luca declared, standing among the remnants of their shattered world. Agnes nodded, a fierce fire igniting her spirit. The battle was far from over, their hearts beat in unison like a war drum, a testament to the resilience that lay buried beneath the ashes of despair. The clock ticked forward, yet time felt suspended, as if the universe paused to allow us to grieve. And as the darkness encroached, we could only listen to the echoes of those who came before us, the whispers of 1,000 souls carried on the wind. This was not just the plague, it was a reckoning, a moment when humanity stood naked before the cosmos. And in the midst of it all, fear, heartbreak, resilience, we found ourselves. All we could do was hold our breath and wait, the shadows deepening, the silence growing louder. The world turned, but our story was just beginning, spiraling into the void of uncertainty, still waiting for the dawn to break once more. The stench of blood hung thick in the air, a miasma of dread wrapping itself around the dimly lit room like a shroud. It clung to the walls, absorbed by the wooden beams that creaked under the weight of misery. The flickering candlelight illuminated the pale face of a woman sprawled across the table, her breath shallow, the life draining from her as swiftly as the blood pooled at her feet. I stood frozen, heart pounding, feeling the thrum of panic echo in my chest, a relentless reminder of the fragility of flesh, the merciless grip of mortality. "Hold her tighter." The voice of the physician cut through the haze, raw and desperate. His hands, caked in crimson, trembled as he fumbled with his instruments, a gruesome array of knives and leeches that reflected a time when medicine danced on the edge of grotesque and absurd. I watched, entranced yet horrified, as he leaned into the chaos, determined to summon hope from the jaws of despair. I remember the first time I witnessed the grim ballet of medical practice. The room was a theater of suffering, the audience, a collection of anxious faces, all too aware of their own mortality. I was a mere child then, clutching my mother's hand, feeling her warmth seep away as she gazed at the doctor with an expression that was part faith, part fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread, "I just want to live." But even then, I felt it, the truth that hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Sometimes, life is a gamble with odds stacked impossibly high. "More leeches," the physician barked, his eyes wild, as if the creatures could somehow siphon away the affliction that coursed through her veins. I remember the way the leeches squirmed in their glass jar, glistening with the promise of relief yet dripping with the grotesque. They were nature's dark soldiers, creeping toward their battlefield. They fed on the sick, and perhaps, in some twisted way, they offered a chance at salvation. Or was it just a cruel joke, a form of torture masquerading as care? I glanced at the woman's husband, his face a canvas painted with despair. His hand clutched a piece of fabric, a scrap of their life together, now stained with her blood. I could feel his heart breaking, the sound of it resonating through the silence that enveloped us, a haunting symphony of love and loss. "Is this how it ends?" he seemed to ask, eyes pleading for a miracle while knowing full well miracles had long since fled these walls. The physician worked feverishly, sweat mingling with the blood on his brow, a grotesque reminder of the burden he bore. "I remember," he muttered, as if recalling some ancient mantra. "I remember the texts. I remember the salves and potions. But what good were words in the face of death? What comfort could a book provide when the ink was still wet with the horrors of the past?" As the minutes stretched into an eternity, I could feel time folding in on itself, each tick of the clock reverberating through the air, a relentless reminder that every moment was precious. It was a cruel joke, really, that time should feel so infinite when faced with the spectre of loss. I was caught in its grasp, yearning for resolution yet dreading the conclusion that loomed on the horizon like a storm cloud ready to burst. Then the physician turned, his eyes wide with a spark of hope. "The cautery," he declared, breathless with inspiration. "It could cauterize the wound, seal it shut." He held the sizzling iron bar like a sword of justice, a weapon against the encroaching darkness. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground, anchored by the weight of the moment. "Please," the husband choked out, his voice breaking under the strain. "Anything but that." His eyes were pools of anguish, reflecting the flickering candlelight, and I could see a memory flash behind them, their first dance, their laughter ringing through the air like music, so far removed from this horror. But there was no time for hesitation. The physician pressed forward, his resolve hardened. "It's our only chance," he shouted, and in that moment, it was as if the universe held its breath. I could feel the air crackle with tension, an electric pulse that promised something, hope or despair, I couldn't tell. I remember the moment the iron touched flesh, the agonizing scream that tore through the silence like a banshee's wail. It was a sound that burrowed into my soul, echoing through the corridors of my mind, relentless and unyielding. The smell of burnt skin mingled with the iron tang of blood, and I could see the husband's face twist in horror, a mask of love and loss, caught between life and death. The woman writhed, her body convulsing as if fighting against the very act meant to save her. In that instant, I felt the weight of humanity, our desperate struggles, our unyielding hope, and the heartbreaking reality that sometimes, no matter how hard we fight, we are left with nothing but the ashes of our dreams. As the physician pressed on, a fiery determination ignited in his eyes, an unwavering belief that he could wrestle life back from the grips of death. I could see the ghosts of his past failures haunting him, shadows lurking just beneath the surface, yet he pressed on, the intensity of his focus almost palpable. "Stay with me," he urged, and I could see the flicker of life in her gaze, the faintest glimmer of acknowledgement. In that moment, time stopped, the weight of the world hanging in the balance. Would she rise again? Would love conquer all? But as the smoke curled around us, wrapping us in its ghostly embrace, I felt the tension reach its peak, an unbearable crescendo that threatened to obliterate everything. Life and death danced a macabre waltz, teetering on the edge of a knife, and I held my breath, waiting for the music to stop. And then, silence. The air thickened, the weight of countless lives pressing down upon us, leaving us gasping in the void. It was in that silence that I understood, the practices of the time, with all their grotesque beauty, were a reflection of our very souls, poised forever between hope and despair, life and death. The groans echoed through the dimly lit chamber, a cacophony of despair that clawed at the walls like a lost soul seeking refuge. A woman lay there, her breath shallow, eyes wide and glassy, as if they were windows to a world too dark to bear. I stood at the threshold, a mere witness to this dance with death, heart racing as my mind reeled under the weight of her suffering. The stench of sweat and fear swirled around me like a noxious cloud, heavy with the whispers of the past, a reminder that in this era, healing was as elusive as hope itself. I remember how the townsfolk spoke of illness as if it were a spectre, a vengeful ghost lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment of weakness to strike. The devil's work, they would hiss, as though invoking the name of Lucifer would banish the very diseases that ravaged their lives. The belief that sickness was a punishment for sins, a finger pointed by the Almighty, twisted in my gut. How could they not see the truth? How could they not recognize the grim irony of a healer who had never held a scalpel or a stitch, a priest who offered prayers while a fevered child writhed in agony? Then there was Elias, the apothecary, an oddity in this tapestry of despair. He stood amidst jars filled with herbs, as if fashioning a potpourri of potions that would never come close to saving a life. A pinch of this, a whisper of that, he would say, chuckling as though he were concocting a love potion rather than a remedy for a plague that felt more like a grim reaper than a doctor. I remember the way his hands trembled as he ground the dried leaves, even he knew the futility behind his art. I only play the part, he would lament, a haunted look in his eyes, but the gods are deaf to my pleas. Yet, time and again, people flocked to him, drawn not just by the hope of healing but by the desperate need to believe. They clung to the idea that perhaps the bloodletting, the leeches, the potions made from distant lands, would save them. It was a cruel trick, this dance of faith and desperation, but in this shadowy world, it was all we had. I remember the night the plague swept through our village like a thief in the night, a gust of wind that carried with it the scent of decay. The streets became a graveyard, each body a poignant reminder of our fragile mortality. They tossed the dead into makeshift pits, bodies piled like discarded thoughts, and I felt a chill course through me. They thought it was the foul air that birthed the sickness, miasma they called it, a toxic fog that seeped into our lungs. But I knew better, I felt it in my bones, the truth was far darker, woven into the very fabric of our existence. And yet, there was Marjorie, the woman who had once been radiant, her laughter a melody that danced through the streets. Now, she lay cold and pale, a silhouette of the life she had known. I remembered how she had told me tales of the stars, her eyes lit with wonder, claiming that each star was a soul watching over us. Even in the darkest nights, she would say, they are our guiding lights. But now, as I knelt beside her, all I could see was the dark void where hope once sparkled. "Is it my sins?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Am I being punished?" Those words tore through me like a dagger. What could I say to comfort her? That the world was cruel, that fate played its hand with a callous grin. No, instead, I simply held her hand, wishing it would keep her tethered to the fragile thread of life. But the darkness was relentless, and I could feel its grip tightening around her soul. In those moments, the air thickened with despair, and I began to see the absurdity of it all, the blind faith we placed in remedies that were little more than folklore, tales spun by the old wives who clung to their hearths and whispered secrets into the night. A new moon's light will cure the fever, they would insist, pinching their noses at the foulness that surrounded us. And still, we believed. I remember the laughter of children ringing out in the streets, their joy juxtaposed against the backdrop of suffering. They would run past, oblivious to the whispers of disease that lurked around the corners, as if innocence could shield them from the horrors that awaited. They bathed once a year, I would joke to Elias, trying to mask the dread that gnawed at my insides. So yeah, romance was earthy. Yet every punchline felt like a funeral dirge, the laughter hollow and fleeting amidst the encroaching shadows. The days blurred into nights, and as the moon waxed and waned, so too did our hope. The village turned into a ghost town, the spectre of grief hung heavy in the air, and I found myself wandering the deserted streets, haunted by memories of those we had lost. Each face a chapter in an unwritten tale, each death a reminder of our mortality. Would I succumb too? Would I become just another whisper in the dark? And then came the moment of confrontation, the clash of faith and despair, where belief faltered under the weight of reality. I found myself standing at the altar, a flickering candle casting shadows that danced with the echoes of the past. "Is this what you want?" I shouted into the void, the words choking me. "Is this your grand design?" The silence that followed was suffocating, a tangible reminder that the cosmos turned a deaf ear to our cries. And amidst it all, the clock ticked, each second haunting, relentless, a reminder that time was slipping away. The light dimmed, and I could feel the inevitable closing in, a miasma far more potent than the air of decay that surrounded us. But still, in that darkness, I grasped at the threads of connection, of shared pain and fractured faith. I held on to the dream that perhaps, just perhaps, we would find a way to mend our broken souls. Yet, the truth loomed like a spectre, waiting just out of reach, an echo of something darker, something deeper. As dawn crept over the horizon, I stood there, heart racing, breath caught in my throat. The world outside was shifting, a tapestry woven with shadows, and I knew this was not the end. No, the journey continued, the scars of our past lying bare, waiting for the first light of understanding to shine upon them. The clock on the wall ticks with a relentless precision, echoing through the sterile room, a metronome counting down the seconds to an inevitable reckoning. I can hear the muffled cries from the hallway, a cacophony of despair that seeps through the cracks of the door like smoke from a fire that refuses to be extinguished. I stand there, white coat clinging to me like a shroud, the weight of my responsibilities pressing down, heavier than this damned air. I remember the first day I wore this coat. I thought it would bless me with authority, transform me into a savior. But now? Now it feels like a straitjacket. Across the room, Dr. Elise Harper stands over a patient, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she grips the scalpel. The fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows, distorting her face into something unrecognizable, a mask of determination laced with doubt. Her breath is quick, uneven, like a child's first plunge into icy water. "We have to act fast," she murmurs, the words barely escaping her lips. She glances at me, and in that moment, I see the flicker of fear in her eyes, fear that I know all too well. What if we fail? I remember the way we used to laugh. Back when we believed in the sanctity of life, back when hope lingered in the air like fresh flowers in spring. But hope is a fickle mistress, and now it seems as distant as the stars obscured by a city's glare. I rub my temples, trying to shake off the creeping despair. "Elise," I whisper, "we can't do this. Not a procedure this risky." My voice is barely a whisper, as if the walls themselves might snitch on my wavering faith. "You think I don't know that?" she snaps, the steel in her voice cutting through my hesitation. "You think I want to be here? I didn't choose this. None of us did." Her eyes blaze with an intensity that blurs the lines between courage and panic. I want to reach out, to comfort her, but I'm rooted in place, shackled by my own fears. Behind her, an elderly man lies on the operating table, a ghost of the life he once lived. His skin, pale and stretched tight, tells stories of past loves, lost battles, and the slow decay of time. As the machines beep around him, they pulse like an anxious heartbeat, counting down the moments of his existence. He deserves better than this, better than us. "Dr. Harper," a voice booms from the back, startling us both. It's Dr. Edwards, the chief surgeon, his presence a dark cloud hanging over our fragile hope. We don't have the luxury of time to coddle our fears. If we don't intervene, he'll be dead by morning. Each word strikes like a hammer against the anvil of our resolve. I glance at the ceiling, at the flickering light, a reminder that nothing is eternal. I remember my own father, how he lay on the hospital bed, eyes closed, struggling to remember my name, his son, his flesh and blood. The doctors failed him. They failed us. And here I am, standing on the precipice of my own failure, haunted by ghosts of my past. "Do it," I hear myself say, and the words taste like bile on my tongue. I don't recognize my own voice anymore. "But if we do this, you have to promise me," I swallow hard, "promise me we'll fight for every breath." Elise nods, and I see something shift in her. That flicker of fear morphs into a fierce determination. We are warriors now, standing against the dark. It's a delusion, but it's our delusion, and in this moment, that matters. The room shudders under the weight of our decision. The tension is thick, suffocating, and as Elise makes the first incision, I can't tear my eyes away, each movement an elegant dance of desperation and hope. Blood spills forth, a crimson tide that drowns the sterile white as it drips onto the floor, pooling like the remnants of shattered dreams. Focus, I urge, but my own heart races, pounding a chaotic rhythm in my chest. We have to stabilize the pressure. The words come out clipped, frantic, and I know somewhere in the depths of my mind that I'm losing control. Damn it, why won't it stop? Elise's voice rises, panic threading its way through her composure. I reach for her hand, gripping it tightly, the warmth grounding me in this whirlwind of chaos. Breathe, I say, and it sounds like a prayer. Breathe with me. Time stretches, warps like a funhouse mirror, and in that moment, I can see every single choice that led us here. The sleepless nights. The drowning in textbooks. The relentless pursuit of knowledge, of understanding, of life. I think of the patients who slipped through our fingers, the promises we made, the way we stood beside their beds whispering, "You will be okay." But what do those words mean when fate has already drawn its cruel hand? Time. Dr. Edwards barks, and I feel the air grow colder, tightening around us like a vice. The elderly man's heartbeat begins to falter, each thump a drumroll leading us toward an unknown conclusion. Come on, Elise mutters under her breath, those words becoming a mantra, a lifeline in the storm. I close my eyes for just a second, and it's as if I can hear the universe whispering to me, the cosmos spinning tales of life and death, of sorrow and joy, of medicine and magic. Let him fight, I shout suddenly, the words bursting forth with an intensity one didn't know I had. Let him feel that he's not alone. In that moment, our hands move in unison, like dancers lost in a rhythm only they can hear. We stitch, we suture, we breathe life back into this fragile flesh. I remember the warmth of my father's hand, the way it felt when he squeezed mine for the last time. And in that room, with the smell of antiseptic and the shadows creeping closer, we become more than just physicians. We are conduits for hope, for fear, for life itself. And as the clock ticks on, I embrace the chaos, knowing that every heartbeat is a battle, and together, we fight against the darkness that threatens to consume us all. The intensity builds, layering over us like the oppressive heat before a storm, leaving us teetering on the edge of something vast and ungraspable. The world outside ceases to exist, it is just us, our trembling hands, our raw hearts, fighting against fate's unyielding grip. And when the moment arrives, a breath held captive in our lungs, I am left wondering, searching for the remnants of what it means to be human, to be a healer in a world that is so easily broken. The shadows whisper, the night deepens, and somewhere, a clock continues to tick, counting down to an uncertain tomorrow. The air was thick, a suffocating blanket of dread. Outside, the village lay hushed, a spectral tableau of shuttered windows and deserted streets. In the center of it all, the clinic stood like a lone lighthouse amidst a storm. I remember the first time I heard it, the chilling toll of the bell, announcing another lost soul. The sound reverberated through the very marrow of my bones, an ominous reminder of my duty, my burden, my calling. Dr. Ilara Voss stood beside me, her hands trembling as she clutched her medical bag, the leather cracked and worn, like her spirit. We exchanged glances, each knowing the weight we carried, yet both unwilling to voice the fear gnawing at our insides. "What if it's too late?" she whispered, her voice a brittle leaf in the wind. The question hung heavy, a ghostly echo of our thoughts. I could see the shadows clinging to her eyes, the sleepless nights filled with the cries of the afflicted, the haunting faces of those we couldn't save. The plague was not just a disease, it was a merciless thief, stealing lives and hopes alike. I remember the children, their small hands grasping at the air, reaching for dreams that would never come. Dr. Alaric Grant, the ever-optimistic soul among us, was trying to rally the spirits of our dwindling team. "Today, we save lives," he declared, his voice buoyant, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Alaric had always been the heart of our trio, the one who could break the ice with a laugh and a smile, even in dire times. We're not gods, I reminded him, my tone sharper than intended. It felt wrong to shatter his fragile optimism, yet reality crashed in like a wave, cold and unforgiving. With every patient we lost, the weight of our failures pressed harder against our chests. It was suffocating. The clinic door creaked open, and a gust of damp, cold air rushed in. A woman entered, her clothes tattered, her face a mask of despair. "Help me," she gasped, her voice laced with a raw desperation that clawed at my insides. Behind her, shadows loomed, a husband, a child, both pale and gaunt. I felt my heart seize, a compression that echoed the tightening grip of the plague upon our world. We sprang into action, Ilara moving with a confidence I struggled to find. She was the steady hand, the one who could face the storm and not tremble. I was spiraling. I remember my first patient with the plague, a boy, no older than 8, lying in a bed that became his tomb. His eyes were vacant, searching for a miracle that never arrived. Alaric, though he wore smiles like armor, could not escape the reality of our situation. "Can you save them?" the woman pleaded, her voice rising in panic as she saw the way we hesitated. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening, the air thick with the scent of fear and impending doom. "We will do everything we can." But the words tasted bitter, a hollow promise. What did it mean to be heroic in a world where the Reaper loomed at every corner? We donned masks, shields against the oncoming storm, yet it was our hearts that bore the true scars. Ilara worked tirelessly, her hands moving deftly, examining their frail bodies. I watched her, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, every fiber of her being focused on saving lives. There was something mesmerizing about her determination, a fire that flickered, even in the darkest of nights. I wanted to tell her that I admired her tenacity, but the words lodged in my throat, trapped like the hope I couldn't bear to express. Time blurred around us, the minutes stretching into an eternity as we navigated through the abyss of sickness. The clock on the wall ticked ominously, each clang echoing like a death knell. I remember the faces of the lost, their eyes wide with pleading as they slipped away. "We need to get them water," Alaric said, his voice thick with urgency. We hustled through the clinic, the pleas of the dying ringing in our ears, a cacophony of despair that seemed to drown out everything else. In the back room, the stench of sweat and fear mingled with the antiseptics we were so desperate to rely upon. I pressed a cool cloth to a child's forehead, the heat radiating from her body like a feverish sun. "Stay with me," I urged, my voice breaking, as her eyes fluttered. I felt my own heart shattering, the weight of her fragility pressing down on me. "Please, just hold on." Ilara returned, blooded hand staining her once pristine coat, breathless, yet somehow composed. "We can't lose hope," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I saw the ghost of doubt flicker across her features. My heart ached for her, for us, burdened by the weight of unfulfilled oaths and promises made to the universe. The night wore on, shadows growing longer as the clinic echoed with cries that gnawed at the very fabric of our souls. I was tired, my limbs heavy, thoughts swirling like smoke. But in that suffocating silence, in the cacophony of anguish, I felt a flicker of something, a resolve. A fleeting yet fierce flame ignited within me. I would not allow despair to conquer us. And yet, in the darkest corners of our minds, we all knew the truth: the plague was merciless. It would take its toll, would claim its due, and all we could do was dance with its shadows. As dawn broke, the first rays of light illuminated the devastation we had fought against, but I knew one thing for certain: we would rise again, time and time again, to face the spectre of death, because in this battle, duty was the only armor we had. I remember, I whispered to Ilara as we stood back to back, a united front against the encroaching darkness. I remember every face, every tear. And I promise, we will not forget. The bell tolled again, but this time, it felt different, a reminder of our mortality, yes, but also a call to arms, a challenge laced with urgency. We were doctors, warriors against an unseen foe, and as long as we breathed, we would fight. And with that vow hanging in the air, we prepared for what was to come, not knowing how the next wave would break upon our hearts. We were caught in a cycle of hope and despair, a relentless ebb and flow, and still, we stood. Together. Always. The sirens wailed like banshees in a nightmarish chorus, slicing through the fragile fabric of the city, each shriek a reminder of the suffering festering within its walls. I stood in the shadows of the alley, heart pounding, the acrid scent of fear mixed with the cold bite of rain clinging to the air. It was hard to remember a time when silence didn't have a sinister edge, when the absence of sound didn't swirl with the weight of impending doom. Elena was there, too, crouched beside me, her gaze locked on the flickering blue lights of the police cars that danced like phantoms in the darkness. "What if they come for us?" she whispered, voice trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Her fingers clawed at the fabric of her jeans as if holding onto something real, something solid in this world of uncertainty. I could see the fear etched in the lines around her eyes, those beautiful, haunted eyes that had once sparkled with hope before the world collapsed into chaos. "We'll be safe here," I said, but the lie tasted bitter on my tongue. I had no idea what safe meant anymore. The word had been stripped of its meaning, twisted into a mockery of its former self. As the shadows lengthened and the night thickened, I felt the weight of my own heartbeat, each thud echoing the fear that threatened to spill out of me. Then there was Marcus, huddled in the corner, his face pale and drawn, eyes darting like a trapped animal. He had always been the brave one, but now he seemed smaller, diminished. "What if it's already too late?" he murmured, voice barely a whisper, and I saw the flicker of despair that echoed my own thoughts. I remembered how he used to laugh, the way it lit up the dimmest room, but laughter felt like an echo from another life now. Outside, terrifying silence fell, only to be shattered by the shouts of panic and the thud of boots on pavement. I pressed my back against the cold brick, the dampness seeping into my skin. There was a ghost of a memory, a distant time when we laughed together at the absurdity of our lives, the way time slipped through our fingers like sand. I remember, I found myself saying, when the hardest decision was what movie to watch on Friday night. Elena turned to me, her brow furrowing. "This isn't a movie, you know," she replied, but there was a softness in her voice, a willingness to cling to those memories that had once been everything. "I know," I breathed, the reality of our situation crashing down like a wave. "But I wish it were." My heart ached with the weight of the world crashing down, each breath I took filled with the decay of hope. Then came the sound, the heavy tread of boots approaching, a chorus of voices growing louder, more frantic. The message had been clear: quarantine. An imposed barrier meant to shield the healthy from the infected, to stave off the inevitable collapse of society. But in the darkness, what about those caught in between? What about the innocent, like us, clutching at the fraying edges of our sanity? A flicker of movement caught my eye, our shadows darting through the dimly lit street. They were coming closer, and in that moment, I could feel my pulse quicken, my chest tightening with panic. "They're here," Marcus gasped, the color draining from his face. I turned, my breath hitching, as the figures emerged from the darkness, their faces obscured by masks that seemed to mock our very existence. "They're just doing their jobs," I tried to convince myself, but the words felt hollow, echoing like a distant drumbeat of dread. They were enforcing the law, bringing order to chaos, but what happened when the line between order and tyranny blurred? Each step they took felt like a countdown, the air thickening with dread. I could see them scanning the alley, their gloved hands clutching weapons meant to protect but that could just as easily destroy. I felt a surge of anger ripple through me, fueled by the fear pooling at my feet. Why? Why do we have to hide like this? I cried out, but my voice faltered against the weight of reality. Elena squeezed my hand, grounding me. "We have to stay quiet. We have to survive." But what did survival mean? I remembered the dreams I had once, the dreams of freedom, laughter, of holding her close under a starlit sky. Now, only the ghosts of those dreams haunted me, a constant reminder of what we had lost. And then, without warning, it happened. A shout echoed, a voice breaking through the night. "This is your last warning. Come out with your hands up." The command hung heavy in the air, a lead weight pulling me into the depths of despair. I felt Marcus' body tense beside me, a coiled spring ready to snap. "We can't stay here," he said, voice trembling with urgency. "They'll find us." But where could we go? The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating with fear and desperation. I caught a glimpse of the moon, pale and watchful above, and it struck me, a ghostly reminder of everything beyond this prison, this nightmare. We can't let fear dictate our choices, I said, surprising even myself with the conviction that surged within me. We have to fight back. Elena's eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting within the storm of her doubts. But what if we don't make it? She asked, her voice trembling. Then we'll go down fighting, I replied, feeling a surge of adrenaline push me to the edge of my limits. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to those dreams. But deep inside, I wondered if I truly believed that, or if I was simply trying to mask the growing dread pooling in my stomach. I could sense the tension building, the impending clash between survival and surrender, and it felt like a noose tightening around my throat, each breath a struggle against the darkness closing in. And then, just like that, the moment shattered, the sound of footsteps nearing, the voices growing louder, and I realized that time itself had become our enemy. In that fleeting heartbeat, everything hung in the balance. The night stretched before us, a canvas painted with the hues of fear and hope, and as the figures loomed closer, I could feel the weight of every unspoken word pressing against me, a tide of emotions threatening to drown us. The world outside was collapsing, and we stood on the precipice of something unimaginable, our fates intertwined in a dance of desperation and defiance. I closed my eyes, steeling myself for the unknown, knowing in my heart that whatever awaited us would shatter everything we thought we understood of survival. And as the chaos unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the beginning, a dark prelude to the storm that was about to consume us whole. The clock ticks, a relentless heartbeat echoing in the silent, sterile room. Shadows cling to the walls, stretching like desperate hands, reaching for warmth that has long since vanished. I sit there, the weight of the world on my chest, my breath shallow. Outside, the city pulses with life, unaware of the invisible predator stalking its streets, a virus, cold and merciless. But inside, we are trapped, ensnared in a web of fear and uncertainty. This is quarantine, a word that rings with a sinister finality. I remember the day it began, how it felt like a shattering glass, a scream swallowed by the void. The first day, I could still hear laughter, it ricocheted off the walls, teasing the shadows just beyond the threshold. Annie, my sister, stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass, a barrier between us and the world. She was always the brave one, with that wild hair and eyes that sparkled with mischief. What's the worst that could happen? She'd laughed, tossing a pillow at me. But as the news spread like wildfire, cities locking down, borders closing, I felt the air thicken. It became harder to breathe, like the world was stitching itself shut, one thread at a time. Do you ever feel like a ghost? I asked her one night as we lay in the semi-darkness, the shadows dancing to the rhythm of our anxiety. Like we've been forgotten. Her silence was a suffocating blanket, wrapping around us. I feel alive, actually, she replied, her voice a whisper, both defiant and terrified. Like I'm fighting for every breath. I could hear the tremor beneath her words. Days blurred into nights, and the outside world turned into a haunting refrain, a siren song of chaos and despair. Every face I saw through the window became a mask of sorrow, eyes haunted by the specter of loss. Time twisted in on itself, a cruel trick of the universe. I remember the day my phone buzzed with a message, *stay inside. For your safety. It felt like a threat, a warning etched in stone. In that oppressive stillness, fear became our constant companion. I watched as Annie's spirit flickered, a candle in a tempest. She would pace the small kitchen, her fingers tracing the countertops, like she was trying to map the territory of her anxiety. What if we're the last ones, she mused, staring out at the empty streets. What if we're forgotten? Annie, I whispered, but the words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Every day was a countdown to confrontation, a clock ticking down to a moment when we would either shatter or survive. We filled our time with distractions, cooking experiments that often ended in laughter, a ritual of absurdity in the face of dread. I remember our attempts at baking, the flour clouds hung in the air like ghosts of the past, and the kitchen became a battleground of eggs and sugar. The chaos of creation was our rebellion against the silence. But as the days turned into weeks, the laughter vanished, replaced by echoes of despair. The news became a relentless tide, crashing against our fragile sanity. Every report of infection felt like a dagger, twisting in our hearts. I watched as Annie crumbled, her laughter fading into silence. The light in her eyes dimmed, shadows creeping in to claim her. "What's the point?" she would whisper, her voice barely a breath. In those tense moments, I could only offer her my presence, a fragile tether in an unraveling world. I would sit beside her, letting the silence stretch, the weight of unspoken fears hanging between us. "I remember when we thought we were invincible," I said one night, my voice trembling. "When the worst we faced was heartbreak and not this abyss." But love, too, became a battleground. The walls closed in, and confinement turned our whispers into shouts. "You don't understand," Annie screamed one night, her face flushed with frustration. "You're not the one fighting your own mind." I felt the sting of her words, sharp and unforgiving. In that moment, I saw her, really saw her, lost and trembling beneath the weight of her own uncertainty. The world outside continued its dance of decay, but within these four walls, we fought our own war. I remember the night I found her curled up on the floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. It was then that I realized how deeply the virus had invaded not just our bodies, but our minds, our souls. Quarantine was not just a physical separation, it was a haunting, an insidious invasion that thrived on our fears, exploiting our vulnerabilities. As the days became a blur, I felt the need for connection, an insatiable hunger for the outside world. I took to the balcony, leaning over the railing, calling out to strangers below, trying to bridge the chasm between us. "We're still here," I shouted, my voice breaking. I remember the way the city seemed to hold its breath, the world pausing for an instant, listening. And then, the whispers began, small acts of rebellion, signs of life amidst the decay. Neighbors began to sing from their windows, a chorus of defiance against the encroaching darkness. I felt the energy pulse through the air, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. "See?" I said to Annie, pulling her towards me. "We're not forgotten." But how fragile was this thread we clung to? Day by day, the news grew darker, the numbers swelling like a tide we could not hold back. The hospitals overflowed, our fears materializing in the form of cold reality. Is this what they meant by quarantine? To protect us? Annie's voice cracked, the weight of her words wrapping around us like chains. In those moments, time felt like a cruel joke, an endless loop of uncertainty, spiraling into the unknown. I remember gazing at the stars that night, their distant light piercing through the darkness, a reminder of a universe so vast, so indifferent. The cosmos, unfathomable, revealed nothing but the emptiness we felt inside. But even as despair loomed like a specter, we clung to hope, no matter how fragile. The resilience of the human spirit burned within us, a flickering flame against the encroaching shadows. "We can't give up," I whispered, my voice resolute, even as doubt gnawed at my insides. "Not now." The battle raged on, not just against the virus but against our own minds. We were ghosts in our own lives, caught in a cycle of fear and longing, desperately seeking connection amid isolation. Each heartbeat echoed the urgency of our plight, propelling us forward as we faced the unknown. In the cacophony of silence, as fear and love intertwined, the emergence of quarantine practices revealed their true power, a mirror reflecting the depths of our souls. A reflection of the fragility and strength that lay intertwined, waiting to be tested, waiting to be ignited. The ticking clock was relentless, but so were we. And in that struggle, we discovered something profound, a bond forged in adversity, a light flickering against the darkness. And so, we waited, hearts pounding, breaths heavy with the weight of the world outside. We were alive, even in the stillness, a testament to our humanity amid chaos. A struggle that felt unending, yet, in those moments, we knew we were not truly alone. We were in this together, quaking at the edge of uncertainty, gripping the threads of hope tightly, waiting for dawn to break. The silence was heavy, oppressive, thick enough to smother a scream. Outside, the world continued its cruel, indifferent dance, while inside, the air was pregnant with desperation. I stood there, the warmth of the room fading as a chill crept into my bones, my hands trembling as I held the candle, the flickering flame casting grotesque shadows on the walls. It was a mercy to be near the flame, a fragile life in a room full of decay. I glanced at Judith, her face pale and drawn, eyes glistening with fear that stirred within me like a storm. She was my sister, my anchor, and in this moment, she was slipping away from me. A cough erupted from the corner, harsh and ragged, slicing through the stillness like a knife. It was Thomas, our neighbor, his body a mere husk draped in sweat-soaked sheets. He had laughed just days before, sharing raucous tales of misadventures that seemed impossibly distant now. Coughing again, he gasped, and it sounded like death itself was trying to claw its way out. I remember thinking, this can't be happening. Yet here we were, entangled in the jaws of the plague, each breath a calculated risk. "Judith, stay back," I murmured, though the words felt feeble against the suffocating dread. The symptoms were all around us, an invisible spectre lurking in every corner, whispering threats that morphed into tangible fears. Swollen lymph nodes, purple-black as shadows at dusk, whispered their malevolence as I recalled the tales of those who succumbed. Fever raged, consuming bodies from within, making skin blaze with an intense heat, while chills haunted them like ghosts, back and forth, until they broke. I could almost see the plague creeping through the air, a malevolent fog blanketing our small village. I could feel it seeping into the crevices of my mind, taunting me with visceral reminders of our own mortality. What if it comes for us? I thought, each heartbeat punctuating the dark rhythm of my fears. Thomas groaned again, and I felt Judith's breath hitch beside me, the sound a fragile thread tethering us to reality. Her fingers clutched my sleeve, knuckles white, and it felt like she was trying to pull me into her fear, into the abyss. "Help me, please, help me," Thomas rasped, words laced with panic. I could see the tremors in his chin, the way despair twisted his features into a mask of agony. I wanted to reach out, to soothe him, but the weight of my own fear held me captive. Instead, I stood frozen, the candle flickering as though it too was afraid. "I remember," I whispered, the words spilling forth without invitation. "I remember when we thought laughter could keep the darkness at bay. But laughter had abandoned us now, leaving only hollow echoes." Judith's grip tightened. "We can't just leave him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I could see the resolve in her eyes, a flicker of defiance against the encroaching gloom. She was always the brave one, my sister, my warrior, but I knew even she felt the terror that coiled around us like a serpent, waiting to strike. I saw the way her shoulders trembled with the weight of unspoken words. "Judith, if we get too close," I let the threat hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. I could see it, the shadows closing in, the numbers growing too quickly. The plague was a grim reaper dressed in sorrow, and I didn't want to join the dance. But Judith's gaze didn't waver. "We can't leave him to suffer alone," she said fiercely, stepping forward. "He's still human. He deserves compassion." Her words echoed in my mind, a battle cry against the encroaching despair. I hated that she was right, and yet I felt the weight of her courage pressing down on my heart. We stepped closer to Thomas, my stomach churning, the scent of sweat and sickness hanging thick in the air. His eyes were black holes of anguish, pulling at my very essence. "Please," he begged, and the word was raw, bleeding with desperation. I felt my heart fracture, 1,000 shards of anguish piercing through me. Judith knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his brow, a soothing balm against the fever. "You're not alone," she whispered, her voice a soft lullaby amidst the chaos. "We are here. We won't let you go." The fervor in her voice was a beacon, a light in the encroaching dark, and I found myself drawn in, the grip of terror loosening just a fraction. But the moment was fleeting. Thomas's body convulsed, a violent thrash that sent a chill cascading through me. His eyes rolled back, and I could see the darkness foreshadowing his end. I wanted to pull Judith away, to shield her from the devastation, but I was frozen in place, my own fear battling against the instinct to protect. I remember, I thought wildly, the stories of survival. Yet, those tales felt like whispers against the roar of inevitable despair. As Thomas gasped for breath, the room filled with the stench of death, the air thick like molasses, suffocating and bitter. Judith pressed her forehead to his, and for a heartbeat, it felt like love could conquer all. but love has limits, and it couldn't hold back the tide of the inevitable. "Stay with us, Thomas," she urged, tears spilling down her cheeks, and I felt my heart crumble under the weight of her despair. But the darkness was patient, relentless. In a moment, it swept through the room like a storm, and I could almost see its tendrils wrapping around Thomas, pulling him into the void. His breath hitched, one last desperate gasp, and I felt something shift within me, a profound, soul-crushing realization that we were powerless in the face of fate. I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls, but even in that moment of horror, I heard the faintest whisper of laughter echoing through the dark recesses of my mind. In the face of such raw despair, absurdity wrapped around me like a warm blanket, it was the only thing that made sense. They bathed once a year, I thought, so yeah, romance was earthy. Judith's cries melded with the sound of the storm raging outside, and I realized that the plague wasn't just a disease, it was a thief, stealing moments, memories, and lives. I felt the air thicken, and in that suffocating silence, I could almost taste the bitterness of loss looming over us. As Thomas's body stilled, the flame of the candle flickered violently, sputtering against the encroaching darkness. I wanted to turn away, to shut my eyes to the horror unfolding, but I couldn't. Because here, in this room heavy with grief, I felt alive, caught in the snare of our shared humanity, a visceral interplay of love and loss, triumph and despair. And even as the shadows deepened, I knew this moment would stretch into eternity, weaving threads of pain and love into the very fabric of my being. The plague wasn't just a series of symptoms, it was an anatomy of the soul, carving into us, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But even in the darkness, we stood together, two souls against the tide, a reminder that in a world filled with horror, love can still flicker, however faint. I remember the dim light flickering above the hospital bed, casting shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, of moments caught between the mundane and the unimaginable. My brother, Ethan, lay there, his breath shallow, a mere whisper in the cacophony of his fight against the disease that had latched onto him like a leech. The machines beeped, an unrelenting metronome marking the space between life and the void. I felt as if I were suspended in time, each second stretching into infinity, never quite knowing if the next breath would be his last. Ethan's face, once full of mischief and laughter, was now a canvas of pain. I could see it in the way his brow furrowed, the slight twitch of his lips as he battled an unseen enemy. This disease, this relentless beast, was a thief, stealing away the very essence of him. I remembered the day we first noticed it, the cough, a mere tickle in his throat, nothing more than a nuisance. Yet, now it was a harbinger of doom, heralding the slow, insidious progression of something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Deeper, deeper, it had burrowed into his lungs, turning them into crumbling ruins, the air inside them thick and viscous, like molasses. I watched him struggle for every breath, as if he were swimming against an unforgiving tide, the waves crashing over him, dragging him down into the abyss. Each gasp was a prayer, a desperate plea for salvation, and I could do nothing but hold his trembling hand, feeling the chill of his skin seep into my bones. Then there was Mia, my sister, a storm of emotions trapped in a fragile frame. She paced the floor, her heels clicking against the sterile tiles, a sharp sound that matched the jagged edges of her heart. I could see the fear in her eyes wavering like a candle in the wind, flickering but refusing to go out. "What if he doesn't make it?" she whispered, her voice barely rising above the hum of machinery. The question hung heavy between us, a noose tightening around our throats. I didn't have an answer, couldn't offer any solace. Instead, I felt my own heart break a little more with every word. Time melted away in that sterile room, hours collapsing into themselves, a taut string stretched to its limit. Ethan's symptoms morphed with each passing day, a grotesque metamorphosis. First, it was the weight loss, his body shriveling like a forgotten flower wilting in the sun. Then came the fever, a raging inferno that consumed him from within. I watched helplessly as the sweat poured from his brow, soaking the sheets, transforming the once white fabric into a damp, discolored testament to his battle. It was a horror show, a grotesque display of what was left of the brother I knew. I remember the days when laughter echoed in our home, when our biggest worry was who would get the last slice of pizza. Now, those memories felt distant, like a dream fading in the light of dawn. Rummaging through the corners of my mind, I clung to them fiercely, a lifeline in the storm. But the disease was relentless. It was an artist painting over those memories with strokes of despair. Ethan's body was its canvas, and it was creating a macabre masterpiece. Is he scared? Mia's voice quivered, trembling like a leaf caught in a gale. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to think about the darkness creeping into his heart, the fear that gnawed at his sanity like a rat in the walls. But I could see it, the way his eyes widened in the dead of night, the way he gripped the sheets as if trying to anchor himself to reality. The disease was more than just physical, it had a way of weaving itself into the very fabric of his soul. The mental toll was a shadow lurking, whispering cruel suggestions, siphoning the last remnants of hope. There were days when I could see the flicker of defiance in his eyes. I remember the fire, the way he would sit up, his voice hoarse yet fierce, declaring that he wasn't done fighting. I will beat this, he would say, each word a dagger plunged into the heart of despair. But those moments slipped away like sand through my fingers, and soon they were eclipsed by exhaustion. He would falter, his spirit wilting under the weight of what the disease demanded of him. Mia would burst into tears, her heart shattering silently, pieces scattering like shards of glass across the floor. I would wrap my arms around her, holding her fragile frame as if I could shield her from the harsh reality, but the truth was, there was no escaping it. The disease was a predator, stalking us in the shadows, lurking behind every corner, whispering sweet nothings that turned bitter on the tongue. With each day that passed, new symptoms emerged from the darkness, a twisted parade of agony. The racking cough turned violent, tearing through him like a tempest, each spasm sending tremors through his weakened body. I knew it was the disease clawing its way through his lungs, leaving destruction in its wake. Then there were the hallucinations, moments when he would gaze into the distance as if seeing something horrifying just beyond our grasp. "Can you see them?" he asked one night, eyes wide, holding out a trembling hand toward the ceiling as if he were reaching for ghosts only he could see. "Mia, can you hear them?" His voice cracked, a haunting echo that sent chills racing down my spine. I held him tighter, trying to guard him against the phantoms, even as my heart shattered into a million pieces. I could see the fear in Mia's eyes mirrored in my own, a reflection of the abyss that loomed over us, waiting to swallow us whole. The doctor's words were a death knell, each syllable a dagger, sharper than the last. Palliative care. The term slipped from his lips like a shrouded warning, the finality of it wrapping around us like a cold fog. I could feel the room constricting, the walls closing in, suffocating us with reality. The disease was no longer something we could combat, it had taken the reins, and we were left to watch as it dictated the rhythm of our lives. I wanted to scream, to shake my fists at the universe, to demand why this was happening, why the disease had chosen him. Why it had to destroy the laughter, the light, the love. But instead, I sat there, a soldier in this unwinnable war, my heart heavy with the weight of inevitability. Each breath Ethan took felt like a countdown, the clock ticking down to an end that loomed ever nearer. And so we sat, the three of us, suspended in a liminal space where hope and despair danced an agonizing tango, waiting for the next moment to unfold, unaware of the final curtain that would eventually fall. The disease raged on, a relentless tide crashing against the shore, leaving behind shells of moments we could never reclaim. And in that haze of uncertainty, we clung to each other, ghosts in a haunted house, exhaling the last remnants of our former selves. The candle flickered, a weak flame against the oppressive darkness, casting shadows that danced like spirits in a graveyard. I could hear the rattling breath of the dying man in the corner, each gasp a reminder of the thin veil between life and the eternal void. There was no mistaking it, this was a diagnosis born not from knowledge but from fear. The physician, a gaunt figure draped in tattered robes, was hunched over an ancient tome, its pages yellowed and crumbling, filled with arcane symbols and dubious remedies. He looked up, his eyes wide, reflecting a haunting blend of uncertainty and desperation. What had pushed us to this precipice? I remember the days when laughter echoed through my village, when the scent of roasted meats filled the air rather than the stench of decay. But that was before the sickness, a serpent coiling its way through our lives, biting down hard and leaving despair in its wake. There was a chill that settled into our bones, a knowing that life as we knew it was slipping through our fingers like sand. In the shadows stood Eleonora, the baker's daughter, her hands stained with flour, yet trembling with a fear that no amount of kneading could erase. Her eyes were pools of sorrow, reflecting the flickering flame and the dying man whose name had become a whispered curse among us, Gideon, a man once vibrant, now a husk. She loved him still, though their romance was steeped in tragedy, a love story marred by the certainty of loss. "Is there nothing you can do?" she implored, her voice cracking like ice underfoot. The physician's silence hung heavy in the air, a judgment cloaked in uncertainty. I could feel the weight of her gaze, piercing through the veil of my own helplessness. I wanted to scream that we were all lost, that knowledge was a cruel joke, a trick played by the cosmos. But instead, I merely stood, a spectator to this heart-wrenching play. "Perhaps the leeches," the physician suggested, his voice a tremor among the winter winds. "They draw out the impurities." The words tasted bitter. Leeches were the promise of hope wrapped in the grotesque. I remembered the old wives' tales, their laughter echoing like shadows as they spoke of blood and pain, of cures that birthed more suffering. Did they not know? Did they not sense this was a farce, a morbid dance with death itself? Eleonora clutched Gideon's hand, her fingers interlacing with his, a futile attempt to summon warmth back into his body. I watched as his chest rose and fell, each breath a battle against an unseen enemy. He was once a man of laughter, his voice a deep rumble that filled the taverns with joy. Now it was little more than a whisper, a prayer for mercy that would never come. I felt a pang of guilt, the kind that gnaws at you like hunger. What right did I have to mourn? I was not the one who loved him. I remember the time he caught that fish, she murmured, her voice breaking like waves upon a desolate shore. It was bigger than him, he said. He laughed so hard, he fell into the river. A fleeting smile flickered across her lips, a ghost of joy amidst the suffocating despair. I wanted to reach out, to tell her that laughter had become a distant memory, but something stopped me. Instead, I let her reminisce, to cling to those fragile moments as though they were life rafts in a stormy sea. "Fools think they know," the physician spat, frustration rising like bile. "They think they command fate. But look around." He waved his hand, indicating the dim room, the shadows, the despair. "Fate commands us. We are but pawns." His desperation clawed at my insides, a sickening reminder that we were all trapped in this dark game, shackled by ignorance and fear. The leeches, the herbs, the prayers, it was all theatre, and the audience was the void. "What if," I whispered, my voice barely a breath, "what if we abandon this charade? What if we let him go?" The words felt like a dagger, sharp and cruel. Eleonora's gaze snapped to me, a storm of emotions brewing behind her eyes. "You would let him die?" she asked, disbelief thickening the air. I shivered under her intensity, knowing I had struck a nerve, yet I could not turn away from the truth that twisted in my gut. "Sometimes the hardest decisions are the kind that free us," I said, my own heart racing like a caged animal. "Perhaps there's a mercy in letting go." The words hung heavy, and I felt the tension swell, a tempest brewing between us. Eleonora's stare burned like a brand, but as I held it, I saw something shift, understanding, perhaps, or a flicker of rage. The room filled with a suffocating silence, the breath of the dying man barely a whisper. As the candle sputtered, threatening to extinguish, so too did our hope. Gideon's eyes fluttered, and in that moment, I glimpsed the vast cosmos trapped within his gaze, stars fading, time collapsing into itself. I remembered my own fears, my own ghosts, the darkness that whispered that we would all meet the same fate. A shroud of inevitability enveloped us, a chilling reminder that the candle would not last forever. Eleonora turned back to Gideon, her fingers trembling as she brushed his hair away from his forehead. "I remember," she began, her voice a fragile thread woven through the tapestry of despair. "I remember the first time he smiled at me. The world felt so big, so alive, and I thought," she paused, her breath hitching, the weight of memory crashing over her. "I thought we would conquer it together. I once thought I could conquer my own demons," I muttered, half to myself, feeling the sinking tide of my own helplessness. "But they are shadows that do not fade." There was a depth of sorrow in that room, an understanding that we were all tangled in the same web, fear laced with love, hope suffocated by despair. The candle flickered once more, its light wavering as if foretelling the end. The shadows stretched, reaching for Gideon, pulling him closer to the abyss. I could feel Eleanora's anguish like a knife in my own heart. "What will we do if he goes?" she whispered, that fragile hope slipping through her fingers, just as life slipped from Gideon's grasp. The physician shook his head, his face a mask of turmoil. "We will continue to fight. We will find the answers. We must." But there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in his bravado that echoed the truth we all feared. The answers were a mirage, tantalizingly close yet forever out of reach, and in this dark age, our desperate grasping was met only with further darkness. And as the candle flickered one last time, plunging us into the engulfing shadows, I understood, diagnosis in the Dark Ages was not merely an examination of the body, but a cruel testament to the human spirit. We were all haunted by the past, shackled to an uncertain future, and in this moment, it felt as if the very fabric of our lives was unraveling. The void loomed menacingly, and all we could do was hold on, to each other, to the fleeting moments of light. And so, standing on the precipice of despair, we braced ourselves for the darkness that awaited, all of us, fragile and flawed, drifting like lost souls in a world gone cold. The air was thick with despair, a noxious blend of sweat, fear, and the faintest trace of something sweetly rotting. I stood in the dimly lit chamber, watching as a doctor in a tattered black cloak fumbled with his tools, each clink of metal onward a jarring reminder of the chaos outside. A plague had taken root in our town, whispering through the streets like a ghost, and we were powerless to silence its howl. I could feel the weight of the world pressing down on me, every heartbeat echoing the frantic pulse of a society slipping into madness. I remember Clara, her wide, terrified eyes darting between the doctor and the body laid out on the table, a poor soul claimed too soon by an unseen enemy. Her hands trembled, fingers brushing the edges of the sheet covering the lifeless form. Is it the plague?" Her voice cracked like dry twigs underfoot, piercing through the suffocating silence. Uncertainty dripped from the doctor's lips, each word a paradox wrapped in dread. "It could be, but we need to test." The rest was lost in the shadows of the room, melding into a fog of doubt. Clara's breath quickened, panic rising like bile in her throat. She was a nurse, yet here she stood, facing the very spectre of death she had so often confronted in the sterile glow of her ward. Test? With what? A drop of blood? A prayer? Her words cut through me, sharp enough to draw blood, thick with the realization that even the most skilled hands couldn't predict the bite of the plague. She was trying to remain strong, but her resolve was crumbling, and I felt the fissures in her heart echoing my own fear. And then there was the doctor, his face obscured by the grotesque mask he wore, a beak-like formation that had become a symbol of our collective dread. He was both savior and harbinger, wielding instruments that felt more like instruments of torture, prodding at wounds and collecting samples with a macabre enthusiasm that sent shivers racing down my spine. "We have the tools," he murmured, almost to himself, but the understanding, his voice faltered, "the understanding is lacking." The words lingered like smoke in the air, choking us both. I remember the first time I thought I understood the plague. They said it was carried by rats, that it thrived in filth. "Just clean the streets," I had shouted, a naive hope bubbling within me. But the truth was a cruel trickster. The disease was already weaving itself into the very fabric of our lives. Every cough echoed like a death knell, every fever a prelude to the abyss. And as we stood there, Clara's eyes bright with both hope and despair, I recognized a truth that settled deep in my gut: even the cleanest streets could not escape the clutches of despair. A flash of lightning illuminated the shadowy corners of the room, and for a brief moment, I could see the cracks in the doctor's facade, a human, trembling under the weight of knowledge that could not save him. I remember the first case," he muttered, lost in a memory far more monstrous than the current terror. "A boy, no more than 8, found in a field, feverish and calling for his mother." His hands shook as he recalled the moment, as visceral as if it were happening right then. "I thought I could help him. I thought I could save him." But the boy had succumbed, and with him, 100 more had followed, each one a reminder of our limitations, our ignorance. Clara turned to him, the frantic energy around us shifting, morphing into something more palpable, a shared understanding, a shared fear. You were just trying to do your best, she whispered, her voice a thread of compassion in the storm. But the doctor's eyes held a darker truth, reflecting the guilt that gnawed at him like a rat feasting on the very marrow of his soul. As I stood there, a silent witness to their unraveling, I felt the world outside shift. The townsfolk, once vibrant and animated, were now little more than shadows, wandering through the streets like lost souls. They believed the plague was a punishment, a divine retribution for sins unknown. Misconceptions spread faster than the disease itself, feeding on our fears, twisting them into grotesque interpretations of reality. It's the devil's work, they cried, abandoning reason for hysteria. I could almost see the invisible web of paranoia tightening around us, each thread a lifeline severed. Do you think they'll believe us? Clara asked, her voice barely rising above a whisper, her gaze fixed on the doctor. What if we test and it comes back negative? They won't listen to us. They'll think we're mad. Madness felt as tangible as the chill in the air. I could feel it creeping in, wrapping around us like a shroud. The doctor's face grew pale, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. What if we say nothing? What if we let them believe in ghosts and demons instead of the truth? His words hung there, heavy and oppressive, a chilling reminder that ignorance could be as fatal as the plague itself. And the tools, the precious instruments of science, seemed inadequate against the tide of misconceptions. A microscope, a scalpel, a vial, all mere toys in the face of such a monstrous reality. How could we wield such fragile tools against something that felt like a curse, a dark cloud hovering just out of reach? The thought gnawed at me, a relentless whisper, a tormenting echo. I looked at Clara, at the doctor, and felt the fear wrapping around us like a noose. We were three souls bound together in a fight against the dark, desperately grasping for understanding in a world that shunned it. And as the night deepened, I realized, the true battle wasn't just against the plague but against the insidious grip of misunderstanding that threatened to consume us all. In that moment, I understood. In the heart of chaos, where shadows danced and reason faltered, we stood on the precipice of something far greater than ourselves. The true confrontation was coming, and it loomed on the horizon like a storm, ready to break. The fear, the heartbreak, it was only the beginning. As the echoes of despair filled the chamber, I sensed the chilling truth. This was just the start of our fight, a dark comedy unfolding in a world that had forgotten how to laugh. The air was thick with desperation, a palpable weight that pressed against the chest, suffocating yet electrifying. Rain tapped like frantic fingers on the window panes, each drop a reminder of the storm brewing within. I stood there shaking, breathless, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a war drum of anxiety. Across the dimly lit room, shadows flickered, dancing like ghosts, mirroring the turmoil swirling in my mind. Sarah's voice cracked through the silence, raw and trembling. What if it doesn't work this time? The question sliced through me, sharp and unforgiving. I couldn't answer, not with words, not with anything that made sense. All I could do was stare at the small vial in her trembling hands, a potion for hope, a remedy steeped in ancient whispers and desperate dreams. Every flicker of candlelight painted Sarah's face, illuminating the fear etched into her features. She was brave, my fiery Sarah, but tonight she felt like a ghost, drifting through the room with shadows clinging to her. I remembered the first time we'd wandered into those forgotten alleys, desperate to find something, anything, that would save her sister. Those moments felt like a distant dream now, a cruel irony that echoed through time. I had thought we were invincible, that love could conquer all, but now I was drowning in the truth, love can also shatter. And then there was Marcus, our friend, the reluctant healer, standing in the corner, arms crossed and jaw clenched. His deep-set eyes held a storm of their own, dark waters swirling with regret and guilt. I told you the risks, Sarah, he muttered, each word heavy like boulders. This isn't just magic. It's ancient and dangerous. I could see the flickering doubt behind his tough exterior, a man trapped in a role he never wanted. I wanted to scream, to shake him until he understood, this wasn't just about magic, it was about life and death. It was about Sarah's sister, a flickering candle in the wind, and we were desperate to shield her from the storm. The air shifted, growing thick with tension, as the clock on the wall ticked, slowly, deliberately, each second a reminder of the fleeting nature of time. I glanced at it, and the hand seemed to crawl, mocking us, reminding me of all the moments we'd wasted, each tick a countdown to despair. I remember the stories, I whispered, my voice barely rising above the storm's fury outside. The rituals, what if we could? No. Sarah snapped, the fire in her voice reigniting. Those stories are just that. Stories. They won't save her. Her eyes blazed with a fierce determination, and for a moment, the shadows receded, revealing the warrior beneath. But I could see the cracks in her armor, the fear hung like a noose around her neck. I can't lose her, I can't, she repeated, the plea clawing at the walls of my heart. Marcus stepped forward, his voice softer, almost a whisper. What if we combine our methods? The old and the new? A blend of remedies, a fusion of faith and science. He spoke as if he were offering a lifeline, but his words dripped with uncertainty. I wondered if he believed it himself. Sarah looked between us, her brow furrowed with indecision, and I could see her hope teetering on the edge of a precipice, ready to leap or fall. I felt the weight of that decision pressing down like a leaden cloak, heavy and suffocating. In that moment, I could almost hear the whispers of the ancients, their voices merging into an eerie cacophony of warnings and promises. I took a step closer, the fear palpable in the space between us. What if we tried it? Just one last ritual, one last chance to reach her. My heart raced, thundering in my chest as I spoke. We could gather the herbs, the salt, the ashes, everything we need. We can channel the energy of the universe, the whispers of the past. Sarah hesitated, her breath hitching in her throat. I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, battling with the shadows of doubt that clung to her like a shroud. The past felt like a ghost, haunting us, reminding us of every failed attempt, every broken promise. But what if it backfires? Her voice trembled, a delicate thread fraying dangerously. Then we face it together, I breathed, the words leaving my lips like an incantation, a promise. I could feel the atmosphere shift, a subtle tension stretching taut between us, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for our decision. With the storm thundering outside, the world felt both infinitely vast and crushingly small. The air crackled with energy, and as we moved to gather the supplies, I felt the weight of our choice loom over us, the weight of every past failure, every fear. But mingled within that weight was an ember of hope, a flicker of light against the darkness. I could almost taste it, the bitter tang of desperation mixed with the sweetness of possibility. As we prepared, rituals of old whispered in the corners of my mind, each ingredient a thread weaving the fabric of our collective fate. The salt, to purify, the herbs, to heal, the ashes, to remind us of our mortality. Each moment felt like a heartbeat, quickening in anticipation, thrumming with the promise of what lay ahead. The walls of our sanctuary pulsed around us, alive and watching, as if the very universe knew the gravity of our intentions. And the rain, oh, the rain! It fell harder, a relentless barrage echoing the turmoil inside our hearts. Each drop seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 prayers, crashing against our fortress of hope and fear. In that charged atmosphere, I felt the stirrings of something deep within, a connection to the cosmos, to the ancient rituals that danced in the corners of my mind like fireflies in the dark. As we finished gathering the remnants of our lives into a sacred space, the energy crackled with intensity, electric with the weight of our choices. I caught Sarah's gaze, a silent vow passing between us, unspoken yet undeniable. We were in the eye of the storm, a fragile sanctuary amidst chaos, but I felt the tremors of something greater take hold. This is it, I whispered, a mix of trepidation and exhilaration flooding my senses. I could feel the echoes of the past weaving into the present, stitching our fates together with threads of fear and hope. In that moment, I understood, we were not just fighting for her sister's life, we were battling the shadows within ourselves, the doubts that haunted us like specters in the night, the memories that pushed us to the brink. And as the clock ticked on, each second pulling us closer to the unknown, I knew this was just the beginning, a fragile spark in the dark. The echoes of the past lingered, and the future stretched out before us, vast and ungraspable, waiting for the moment we would step into the abyss of our own creation. The clock on the wall ticks like a heartbeat, steady, relentless, mocking. It's midnight, and the faint glow of the street lamp outside casts long shadows across the room. I can hear her whispers, that fragile sound, a prayer caught in the throat, each syllable heavy with desperation. Please, not again. Please. It cuts through the darkness, slicing deeper than any blade ever could. Emma sits curled up in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chin, eyes wide and glassy. A flicker of hope dances in her gaze, but it's an illusion, a mirage in a desert of despair. She clings to her latest treatment like a lifeline, a threadbare rope fraying at the ends, whispering promises it cannot keep. I remember the first time she spoke of it, her voice trembling with newfound excitement, the way her smile nearly broke the fragile shell of her reality. This will change everything, she had said. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to reach out and take her hand, to pull her back from the edge, back to the sunlight. But here we are, trapped in this midnight hour, and I wonder if we're both just ghosts wandering through the remnants of shattered dreams. And then there's Michael, pacing the floor, his footsteps heavy with unspoken fears. He's been through the ringer, treatments that promise miracles and deliver nothing but heartache. The way he clenches his fists, the way his breath shudders like a fallen leaf in a storm, it tells a story of a man trapped in an endless cycle of hope and disappointment. I did everything they said, he hisses, teeth gritted, eyes wild. Every pill, every therapy, every ridiculous diet. His voice rises, breaking like glass, and I can almost see the jagged edges of his shattered trust scattered across the floor. Where's the cure? He demands of the universe, but the universe is silent, indifferent. It watches as we cling to treatments like drowning sailors grasping at straws. I remember how we looked up the latest miracle remedies, Facebook ads promising cures wrapped in glossy images, Instagram influencers posing with their perfectly curated lives, all adorned with hashtags like #healthy and #transformation. We swallowed their words whole, as if they could fill the gaping void inside us, as if they could banish the shadows lurking in the corners of our minds. The clock ticks on, and the air thickens with tension, the kind that wraps around your throat, squeezing tighter with every second. Emma's breaths are shallow, like a candle flickering in the wind. What if it doesn't work this time, she whispers, and I can feel the weight of those words pressing down on my chest. What if I'm just lost? I can't answer her. I can only watch as the bond between us frays, the invisible thread stretching thin. It's not you, I whisper, but it feels like a lie, like a hollow echo in a cavernous void. Michael stops pacing, his eyes darkened with a storm brewing inside. I can't keep doing this, he says, his voice a tremor, a plea wrapped in frustration. I refuse to be a guinea pig for some half-baked theory. His anger radiates like heat from a fire, and I feel it burning through the silence. Each word is a strike against the wall of hope we've built, each syllable a reminder of the treatments that promised everything and delivered nothing. I remember the nights spent poring over medical journals, the endless rabbit holes of research, the erudite language twisting and turning like a serpent. They tell us that this new treatment, this miracle drug, is the answer. But answers come with prices we can't bear to pay. And for what? I remember the statistics, the probabilities laid out like a cruel joke, glaring numbers that twist in the mind, a mockery of what we so desperately want to believe. What if it's just a game? Michael's voice rises, raw and jagged. What if we're just pawns in their little experiment? His eyes bore into me, searching for confirmation, for understanding that I can't fully give. The darkness creeps in, and I can feel it wrapping around us, whispering secrets of futility, a chorus of doubts and fears. I want to scream, to unleash the tempest brewing inside, but instead, I sit in silence, watching as they wrestle with their demons. It feels like watching a train wreck in slow motion, the inevitability of it all, the horror and the resignation. Maybe it's time to stop, Emma finally murmurs, and her voice carries the weight of 1,000 shattered dreams. She looks so small, so fragile, like a porcelain doll at the edge of a precipice. What if we just let go? Let go. The words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. I remember every time we tried to break free, the support groups, the alternative therapies, the endless cycle of promises unfulfilled. Each moment filled with a flicker of hope, extinguished in the face of reality. But how do you let go of something you've clung to for so long? How do you sever the ties when the very fabric of your existence is woven with threads of yearning? I watch as the shadows of uncertainty dance in their eyes, and I feel the weight of it all crashing down around us. The clock ticks on, and the silence fills the room, the kind of silence that screams louder than any words. It echoes in our hearts, a symphony of lost dreams and broken promises. We sit in the darkness, the weight of our choices heavy on our shoulders. I see the glimmer of tears in Emma's eyes, the way Michael's fists tremble. They are warriors, fighting battles against an unseen enemy, and I can't help but wonder if we are all just ghosts, haunting the spaces between hope and despair, forever searching for a cure that remains just out of reach. And as the night deepens, as the clock continues its relentless ticking, I realize we're trapped, painted into a corner by our own desperation. The shadows loom larger, and I know this isn't the end. It's merely the beginning of a new cycle, an endless loop where treatments fail, where hope flickers and fades, and where the heartache echoes through time, a chilling reminder of our fragility. She stood at the edge of the roof, the city sprawled beneath her, a jagged skyline against the bruised sky. The wind howled, swirling around her like a tempest of voices, the whispers of those who had judged her, labeled her, a ghostly chorus that echoed in her mind. Fear gripped her heart, a vice tightening with each breath. She peered down through the haze, caught between two worlds, the intoxicating freedom of the fall and the suffocating weight of the stigma she wore like a shroud. I remember, her voice cracked against the wind, a frail whisper lost in the cacophony. I remember the first time they called me broken. The word sliced through the air, a dagger laced with venom, a label that stuck to her skin like a tattoo, a constant reminder of her perceived inadequacies. Behind her, Marcus watched, his heart thundering in his chest like a war drum. He had always been the protector, the one who could sweep in and save the day, but now, he felt helpless, his feet rooted to the ground as if the concrete beneath him had come alive, pulling him down into its unforgiving embrace. "Don't," he pleaded, the single word wrapped in desperation, as he fought against the tide of his own panic. "Please, just step back." But she didn't move. Instead, she turned and locked her eyes onto his, a fierce storm brewing within. "You think I'm afraid of falling?" she shot back, her voice laden with venom, sharp as glass yet cracking with pain. "You think I care about that? I'm terrified of being seen, of being judged. That's what keeps me up at night." Time slowed, each second stretching into eternity as unspoken fears hung between them like a thick fog. They were both drowning in a chasm of unworthiness, shackled by the heavy chains of societal expectations. "I remember the nights I lay awake," she continued, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "The nights I couldn't breathe because the weight of everyone's thoughts pressed down on my chest. I thought I could escape it all." In that moment, the world around them faded into a hazy blur, a backdrop to the raw, visceral truth pouring from her lips. Every laugh, every sideways glance, it was like they were all holding a mirror up to my flaws. "I don't want to be their ghost. I don't want to haunt this place." Marcus felt the chill creep down his spine, the realization that he had never truly understood the depth of her isolation. He was caught in a whirlwind of guilt and fear, grappling with his own demons, those stubborn shadows that gnawed at his heart. "I know I'm not perfect," he admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm scared too. Scared of losing you. Scared of what happens if you step off that ledge." The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with unspoken words. It wrapped around them like a thick fog, suffocating yet oddly comforting. "What if," she began, her voice cracking, "what if I don't want to be saved?" And there it was, the knife edge of vulnerability, the jagged truth that cut through everything they had known. The stigma of mental health had been an unrelenting specter in their lives, a monster they had both battled in their own ways. "You're stronger than you think," Marcus urged, each word a desperate plea, but his own voice trembled, filled with an uncertainty that betrayed him. "You don't have to fight this alone." "I don't want to fight anymore," she spat back, her words laced with fury and fragility, a paradox that made her tremble. "I'm tired of pretending. Tired of being strong when all I want is to scream." He stepped forward, heart pounding in his chest like a captive bird. "Then scream." The intensity of his gaze bore into her, raw and unwavering, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the despair. "Let it out. Don't let the world silence you." And then, with the weight of the moment crashing down around them, she did. A scream erupted from the depths of her soul, a cacophony of pain, frustration, and unfiltered emotion that shattered the silence like glass. It echoed through the streets, ricocheting off the buildings, a primal cry that laid bare the scars of her existence. Marcus felt it ripple through him, a tremor that shook the very foundations of his being. He closed his eyes, letting her pain wash over him, the haunting beauty of her struggle leaving an indelible mark on his heart. I remember that scream, he thought, the way it carved through the night, raw and real. As the echoes faded into the night, they stood together, suspended at the precipice of everything that had once held them captive. "We can't change what others think," he murmured softly, his breath mingling with the cool night air. "But we can change how we face it." The shadows around them shifted, the city pulsating with life, each flickering light a reminder of the battle that lay ahead. "It's not about falling," she said, a glimmer of resolve creeping into her voice. "It's about rising despite the fear. Despite the stigma." And there, in that fleeting moment, an understanding ignited between them, a fragile bond woven from their shared pain. They were two souls standing against the tide, ready to confront the demons that lurked in the corners of their hearts. I remember, her voice trailed off, leaving a haunting promise hanging in the air, unfinished yet full of possibilities. The night stretched before them, dark and vast, but for the first time, it didn't feel insurmountable. It felt alive, electric with the potential for change, for healing, for a future unbound by fear. Together, they took a step back from the edge, not out of retreat but out of defiance. They were ready to face the darkness, to dismantle the stigma that had haunted them both. The world below was filled with ghosts, specters of judgment and despair, yet they stood together, a beacon of courage, ready to confront the fear that had once held them hostage. And as they turned away from the ledge, the stars trembled in the sky, whispering secrets of hope, and the night embraced them, a dark tapestry woven with threads of resilience and strength. They had begun to confront the monster within, and for the first time, it felt like they were finally stepping into the light. The sirens wailed, an unholy symphony of panic, slicing through the night air, their shrill cries a prelude to the chaos that unfurled in the sterile corridors of the hospital. The scent of antiseptic mingled with something far more sinister, something rotten that lay just beneath the surface, fear. Fear hung thick, a choking haze that wrapped around every doctor and patient like a vice. It was in the way Dr. David Klein's hands trembled as he adjusted his mask, in the way he avoided eye contact with the nurses, who darted past him like wraiths, each one afraid of becoming a vessel for the disease that lurked, unseen, yet so palpable. I remember that night vividly. I remember the weight of it, pressing down on my chest, as if I were drowning in a sea of unspoken dread. The last patient had been wheeled in, a young woman, barely 20, her body trembling with fever, eyes glazed over, a fragile whisper escaping her lips like a ghost. She was the embodiment of despair, the spectre of contagion that made the air around us electric with danger. I could see the fear reflected in Dr. Klein's eyes, raw and unmasked, as he glanced at her chart, COVID positive. The words could have been a death sentence in that moment, a curse that could spread faster than any remedy could reach. "Get me the hydroxychloroquine," he barked, his voice cracking, desperation clawing at the edges. But I remember what it was like to feel the weight of his fear, the way it wrapped around him, constricting, squeezing. He was a man who had saved lives, yet now stood on the precipice of uncertainty, a mere mortal against the whims of fate. The very tools he wielded to heal had turned into instruments of dread, a morbid dance with death. I could see the nurses flinching, their laughter stifled, replaced by hushed whispers. "Did you hear about the doctor in the other wing?" one of them murmured, her voice trembling. "He's in isolation now." Isolation. The word hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, like a shroud. They were afraid of the very act of caring. A touch, a breath, a moment too close, it could mean the difference between life and death. Among the chaos, there was Sarah, a patient who had been fighting her own battle long before the world had turned upside down. She lay curled in her bed, the thin sheets twisting around her like the vines of some ancient curse. She was a silhouette of what she once was, hollowed out by despair. Her husband's face haunted her, a spectre of normalcy, his laughter echoing in her mind. She remembered their last night together, cooking spaghetti in their tiny kitchen, the scent of garlic and basil wafting through the air, the warmth of his arms wrapping around her. Now, all that remained were echoes and shadows, the warmth replaced by a chill that seeped into her bones. "Please," she rasped, her voice cracking like fragile glass, "don't let them take me away." Fear dripped from every word, pooling around her like a stagnant pond, filled with the weight of unfulfilled dreams. The nurses moved like phantoms around her, their faces obscured by masks, every gesture a delicate ballet of care and horror. They were trapped in this surreal limbo, half ghosts of compassion, half warriors battling an unseen enemy. As the night wore on, the hospital morphed into a labyrinth of terror, shadows stretched long and thin, the fluorescent lights flickering like the last breaths of dying stars. I watched as Dr. Klein's resolve began to fray. He paced the floor, the soles of his shoes echoing like the ticking of a clock, every tick a reminder of time slipping away, of lives hanging in the balance. His own thoughts spiraled into a vortex of doubt. What if he failed? What if he became a carrier, a harbinger of death instead of salvation? I remember, oh how I remember, the moment his resolve shattered. He stood in front of Sarah, staring down at her fragile form, his heart pounding like the drums of war. "I'm here to help you," he said, but the words felt like a lie steeped in irony. His very presence could be the catalyst for her demise. "I don't want to die alone," she implored, her eyes wide, desperate. "Please, don't leave me." The room contracted, the walls closing in, suffocating us all in that moment of vulnerability. It was a haunting tableau, a juxtaposition of hope and despair, survival and surrender. I watched as Dr. Klein's gaze faltered, the weight of her fear pressing down on him, wrapping around his throat like a noose. And then, in a moment that felt eternal, he stepped closer. That small act, taking a step toward her, was imbued with the enormity of a choice, to risk his own safety in the face of contagion, to embrace the fear that lingered like a specter. It was a gamble, a chance taken in the name of humanity. In that instant, the world outside faded into oblivion. All that mattered was Sarah, her trembling hands reaching out, her fear palpable, a thread connecting them, binding them in an unbreakable bond. He leaned in, the distance between them evaporating like a whisper, and for a heartbeat, time stood still. The air crackled with tension, a charged moment suspended in the cosmos. Would he touch her? Would he defy the creeping dread that called around them? Or would he turn away, leaving her in the cold embrace of solitude? In that hospital, a clock ticked relentlessly, counting down the seconds, each tick a reminder of the fragility of life, the relentless advance of fear. And as Dr. Klein made his choice, one way or another, the shadows loomed larger, the stakes higher, the haunting specter of the contagion whispering in the corners, waiting for its next victim. But I didn't know what would happen next. The story unfurled like the frayed edges of a dream, endlessly spiraling, just beyond reach. All I could feel was the weight of fear, heavy, suffocating, binding us all together in this dark and beautiful ballet of life and death, of courage and cowardice, forever marked by the fear of contagion that danced like a ghost in the murky shadows. The air was thick, a slow suffocation, and sweat pooled at the nape of my neck as I stared into the abyss of the plague-ridden village. Shadows danced like specters in the flickering light of the torches that lined the cobblestone streets. I was not alone. Sarah, her eyes wide with fear, no, terror, clutched my arm, the warmth of her grip both comforting and alarming. The world around us teetered on the brink of madness, the cries of the sick echoed like a haunting symphony, a discordant melody of despair that seeped into my bones. I remember the first time I saw a plague doctor. A figure in a long, dark cloak, tall and imposing, the beaked mask looming like a crow waiting to feast on the dead. Curiosity mingled with dread, an intoxicating brew that left my heart racing. The doctor had glided through the village like a ghost, imparting a grim purpose with every step. "I'm not afraid," I told Sarah, my voice trembling as I forced a smile, but inside, the truth was a swirling tempest of fear. "We have to go, Jonah. They say the air is poisoned. We'll catch it." Her voice trembled as she tugged me toward the safety of our crumbling home, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the figure ahead. The beak was a grotesque mockery of life, an absurdity against the backdrop of the dying world. It felt like a bad dream, the kind you couldn't wake up from. "I remember," I whispered, my breath hitching, The tails. They wore those masks to keep away the bad air. They thought it was the miasma. But what if all it does is hide the face of death? What if it's not the air that kills? Sarah's eyes darted back to me, confusion etching deeper lines into her youthful face. You think too much, Jonah, she said, a fragile laugh escaping her lips. We need to worry about what's right in front of us. But what was in front of us was a gaping maw of suffering. I could feel the weight of the village's eyes upon me, hollowed faces peeking from behind shuttered windows. They were watching, waiting for salvation that would never come. The doctor's outfit, a shroud of darkness, seemed to absorb the light of hope, leaving only fear behind. A rustle in the alley jolted me from my reverie. A figure, cloaked in the same darkness, lurked at the edge, eyes glinting from behind the mask. I could feel the weight of their gaze like a caress of ice upon my skin. What do they want? I asked, panic rising. Jonah, we have to move. Sarah's voice broke through the haze, snapping me back to the present. But the doctor was upon us, a silent sentinel, the mask impenetrable, hiding any shred of humanity. A whispering wind caught the edge of my cloak, tugging me toward the shadows. Help us, I found myself saying, the words spilling out before I could swallow them back. The doctor remained still, unwavering, as if my plea was nothing but a leaf caught in a tempest. The beak loomed larger, a grotesque symbol of our desperation, taunting me with its very existence. I remember, I thought, the memories of laughter and love now a distant echo. I remembered the summer nights under a sky sprinkled with stars, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery. The world had felt safe then. Now, the stench of death mingled with every breath, turning my stomach as I struggled to find my footing on the cobbled street. Look at them! Sarah cried, pointing to the figures behind the doctor. Shadows emerged, spectral forms clothed in the same tattered finery. They were the ghostly echoes of those who had succumbed, lost souls haunting the earth, searching for closure. They're everywhere. I knew she was right. The villagers had become shadows of themselves, specters of fear and despair. The doctor remained a harbinger of that dread, a reminder of the reality we could no longer escape. Why do you wear that? I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. What are you hiding? I didn't expect an answer, but there it was, the tension, thick as smoke, heavy with unspoken truths. The air shifted, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of humanity behind the mask, a glimmer of shared suffering. But it vanished as quickly as it came. The silence that followed was suffocating, pregnant with the weight of what was unsaid. Sarah clutched my arm tighter, pulling me back toward the safety of our home, but I felt rooted to the spot, anchored by an invisible thread to the doctor. Time stretched, and with every heartbeat, the world fell away. I was left with the weight of intuition, the sense that something monumental was about to unfold. The echoes of the village faded, leaving only the thrum of my pulse and the relentless ache of uncertainty. Jonah! Sarah's voice broke through again, sharper, more desperate. We have to run. They're coming. But I was transfixed. The doctor remained still, and the world became a blur, my focus narrowing to the figure wrapped in black. What do you see? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What do you know? For an instant, the air crackled with anticipation. The doctor lifted a gloved hand, pointing toward the village square, where the flickering light of a pyre rose like a beacon in the dark. It was an invitation, a challenge, a moment that hung suspended in time. Are you a savior or a monster? My heart thudded loudly, a drum echoing in the silence. Do you choose who lives and who dies? The figure remained silent, an enigma cloaked in shadows. And in that moment, I understood. The doctor was not merely a reflection of our fears, he was a mirror of our choices, our humanity laid bare. I felt the weight of that understanding crash upon me like waves on a rocky shore, and I was both terrified and exhilarated. Jonah! Sarah's voice shattered the reverie again, fervent and pleading. But the doctor's mask remained inscrutable, a haunting reminder that we were all just a heartbeat away from our own reckoning. My heart raced as the shadows closed in, the world outside slipping further away. The doctor stood between us and an uncertain fate, and the promises of salvation whispered in the darkness. Every breath felt heavy, laden with the weight of what had come before and what lay ahead. And as I held Sarah's hand, I felt the pulse of the village, a rhythm of fear and hope intertwined, a symphony that echoed through the darkness. The plague doctor was not just a figure of death, he was a harbinger of truth, an embodiment of our shared fragility. As we stood on the precipice of despair, the night deepened, swallowing the last remnants of light, and the shadows grew long. A choice loomed before us, beckoning like a siren's call, wrapping its tendrils around our hearts. And I knew, even then, that the journey had only just begun. I remember the first time I encountered the beaked mask, a grotesque visage haunting me in the flickering light of a half-empty tavern, shadows dancing like memories across the walls. It loomed over the patrons, a grim sentinel, a harbinger of despair, its long nose seemingly able to sniff out the very essence of death. The air was thick, charged with something unnameable, fear, perhaps, or the remnants of lost hope. People drank in silence, their laughter hollow, as if mocking the very idea of joy. I felt it in my bones, the chill clinging to the back of my neck, whispering secrets of a time long gone, yet alive in the heart of the masquerade. Across the room, Alaric sat, a tempest of emotions wrapped tightly within his own troubled soul. His hands trembled as he lifted his cup, the dregs of ale swirling with memories too bitter to swallow. I saw him glance at the mask, his eyes wide with a mix of dread and fascination, like a moth drawn to flame. Alaric was no stranger to darkness, it knew him intimately, wrapping its fingers around his heart, squeezing until he could barely breathe. He wore his guilt like a cloak, heavy, suffocating. The mask was a symbol of everything he sought to escape, and yet, here we were, two lost souls locked in a dance with fate. Then there was Myra, perched beside him, as fierce as she was fragile, her spirit a wildflower blooming in the desolation. She had seen the worst of humanity, felt the sting of betrayal like a dagger in her back. The mask haunted her dreams, twisting into grotesque forms that taunted her waking moments. She swore she could hear its whispers, the echoes of the past calling to her, reminding her of the loved one she had lost to the plague, to violence, to the indifferent march of time. The beak was a grim reminder of their struggle, of the time when fear draped itself over cities like a shroud, and the streets were littered with the reminders of mortality. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice barely above the clinking of mugs and murmurs, the weight of their souls trapped in that mask. Her eyes searched mine, pleading for understanding, for a way to combat the shadows that clung to her. In that moment, I realized we were not just spectators to history, we were its unwilling participants, caught in the relentless tide of time that swept away everything we cherished. The clock struck, the sound a cruel reminder of the passing hours, relentless in its pursuit of oblivion. The tavern grew dimmer, the air thickening with an unshakable tension, and outside, the world remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within. I could see the mask's influence, how it drew us in, revealing our fears even as it mocked our existence. It was art and death, beauty and decay, all wrapped in an eccentric fabric of grim humor, as if the universe itself had decided to play one last joke on humanity. "Do you think it knows?" Alaric asked suddenly, his voice low, laced with an urgency that made my heart skip. "Does it remember the faces it saw? The cries of the dying? Or is it just an artifact, a symbol of our ignorance?" His gaze was intense, as if he believed the mask held the answers to questions too painful to voice. "I think," I replied, feeling the weight of the moment press down upon us like the thick fog of memory, "that it embodies our fears, our histories. It's a reminder that we are not defined by our past, but we carry it with us, always." The words felt both profound and inadequate, as if I were grasping at wisps of smoke, trying to capture something intangible. But the truth lingered in my chest like a dull ache, echoing the horrors of that time, the pestilence that had claimed so many lives, turning vibrant cities into ghost towns, leaving behind only echoes and shadows. Myra shivered, and I could see the memories flashing behind her eyes, the faces of the departed, the laughter replaced by silence, the warmth of life extinguished in an instant. She reached for Alaric's hand, her fingers trembling against his, and in that small act, a spark ignited between them, a moment of raw, painful connection that felt like a lifeline in a sea of despair. "Sometimes," she murmured, her voice growing stronger, "I think the mask is a gift. A way to remember, to honor the dead." It tells their stories, even when the world forgets. The conviction in her voice cut through the tension like a knife, and I felt the weight of her words settle over us, forming a fragile bond forged in shared pain. But the mask loomed, a silent observer, an agent of chaos. It was both protector and predator, whispering promises of power and retribution, lurking just out of reach. The air in the tavern crackled with an energy that threatened to explode, every heartbeat echoed like a drum, the tension palpable, a ride on a roller coaster perched precariously at its peak. A figure burst through the door, cloaked in shadows, a herald of doom. The room turned, breath caught in throats, eyes wide with fear. I felt my pulse race, the very air alive with anticipation, a churning storm brewing on the horizon. The newcomer's gaze swept over us, lingering on the beaked mask as if it were a key to unlock hidden truths. "I know what it is," they said, voice low and gravelly, drawing us deeper into the abyss. "It is not just a relic, it holds the echoes of our past lives, our fears, our loves, our despairs." The words wrapped around us, pulling us into the darkness, and I wondered if anyone would emerge unscathed. And so it hung there, the mask, the pulsating heart of our shared story, unyielding and eternal, a reminder that history never truly dies, it merely waits, lurking in the shadows, feeding off our fears, our pain, and our relentless quest for meaning in the chaos of existence.